Welcome. I'm Magnus, and I bring you horror stories to help you relax, or maybe to keep you up at night. Tell us where you're from. Are there spooky forests nearby? If you're a fan of scary stories, subscribe and drop a like. Get cozy, and let's begin. My name is Curtis Blackwood. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Seattle where I work as a wilderness photographer. Photography had always been my escape from the mundane office life I once led. But after my divorce last year, it became my full-time passion and profession. I needed something big for my upcoming exhibition, something raw and authentic that would capture the haunting beauty of forgotten places. That's when I stumbled across an online forum about abandoned fire lookout towers in Oregon. One in particular caught my attention, the Deadfall Peak Lookout, constructed in 1937 and abandoned in the late 80s after a series of unexplained incidents. The Forest Service had essentially wiped it from their maps, and locals avoided discussing it. Perfect for my Forgotten Sentinels photo series. I convinced my brother Elliot and his wife Naomi to join me. Elliot had always been the cautious one between us, constantly analyzing risks, while Naomi was an amateur historian who couldn't resist the allure of documenting abandoned places. We also invited my friend Derek, a former park ranger who knew the area well, though he seemed strangely hesitant when I mentioned our destination. Deadfall Peak? You sure about that one, Curtis? He had asked, his usual enthusiasm notably absent. There are plenty of other lookouts that would make better subjects. When I pressed him, he muttered something about bad energy and changed the subject. Coming from a no-nonsense guy like Derek, it only intensified my curiosity. We planned a 4-day trip, allowing ample time to hike to the tower, photograph it in different lights, and explore the surrounding area. The weather forecast showed clear skies, though Oregon's reputation for sudden weather changes kept us prepared for anything. What I wasn't prepared for were the nightmares that plagued me the week before our departure. Dreams of being trapped in a tower while something climbed the stairs, something that wasn't entirely human. I dismissed the dreams as pre-trip anxiety. My therapist had warned that major life changes often manifest in our subconscious, and between the divorce and career shift, my mind had plenty of material to work with. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread as I packed my gear. Cameras, lenses, tripods, camping equipment, and enough provisions to last us a week, just to be safe. The night before we left, I received a strange email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read only Deadfall, and the message contained a single line. The Watcher doesn't like visitors. I showed it to Elliot, who dismissed it as spam or perhaps a prank from someone on the forum where I'd mentioned our plans. I wanted to believe him, but something about those words sent a chill through me that I couldn't explain. As I loaded the last of our equipment into my Jeep Cherokee, my neighbor Mrs. Fulton approached, her weathered face pinched with concern. "I overheard you talking about Deadfall Peak," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My cousin worked for the Forest Service back in the 80s. Whatever you do, don't stay in that tower after sunset." Before I could ask what she meant, she hurried back to her house, leaving me standing in my driveway with a growing knot in my stomach and the distinct feeling that we were venturing into something far deeper and darker than a simple photography expedition. The drive from Seattle to Central Oregon took nearly 7 hours, not counting our stop in Portland to pick up Derek. The further we got from civilization, the more the landscape transformed. Dense evergreen forests giving way to drier terrain dotted with ponderosa pines. Cell service disappeared about 30 miles from our destination, which Elliot meticulously noted in the trip log he insisted on keeping. "Just in case," he'd said, not finishing the thought. Naomi rolled her eyes at her husband's excessive caution, but I found it oddly comforting, especially when the GPS signal started glitching as we turned onto the unmarked Forest Service road that would take us to the trailhead. "This can't be right," Derek muttered, checking the paper map against the increasingly erratic directions from my GPS unit. The access road should be clearly marked. They wouldn't just remove the signage. But they had. The old wooden sign lay face down in the brush, the words Deadfall Peak Trail barely visible beneath a layer of moss and dirt. Someone had deliberately knocked it down. We parked at what appeared to be the remnants of a trailhead, the cracked asphalt of the parking area broken by determined weeds. As we unloaded our gear, I noticed Derek scanning the tree line, his posture tense. "What's wrong?" I asked, following his gaze. "Nothing. he replied too quickly. I thought I saw movement. Probably a deer. But the way his hand drifted to the bear spray on his belt suggested otherwise. The hike started pleasantly enough. The trail was overgrown but still discernible, climbing steadily through pine forest that occasionally opened to reveal breathtaking views of distant mountains. I stopped frequently to photograph the play of light through the trees, the way moss draped over fallen logs like funeral shrouds. In my viewfinder, even the most beautiful scenes held an undercurrent of melancholy, as if the landscape itself was in mourning. Around midday, we came across the first disturbing sign, a perfect circle of dead vegetation about 10 feet in diameter. Nothing grew within that circle. The ground was bare and blackened as if scorched, though there was no evidence of fire. Could be some kind of fungal ring, Naomi suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. She knelt to examine the soil, but jerked her hand back before touching it. "It's vibrating," she whispered, her face pale. "Can you feel that?" I couldn't, but Elliot nodded slowly, his scientific curiosity visibly warring with his instinct to retreat. Derek stayed well back from the circle, his expression unreadable. "We should keep moving," he said flatly. "Still got a ways to go before we reach the tower." As we continued upward, the trail grew steeper and less distinct. Twice we lost it completely, having to backtrack to find where we'd gone wrong. The third time it happened, Derek pulled me aside while Elliot consulted the map. "Curtis, I need to tell you something about this place," he began, his voice low and urgent. "When I was with the Forest Service, there were reports, unofficial ones, about hikers going missing near Deadfall Peak. People who went up but never came down." Before he could elaborate, a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest, sending birds exploding from the trees in panic. It wasn't human. At least, I desperately hoped no human could make such a sound, but it wasn't any animal I recognized either. A cross between an elk's bugle and the shriek of tearing metal, it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Mountain lion," Derek said unconvincingly. "They can sound almost human sometimes." The tension in his shoulders told a different story. As daylight began to fade, we finally caught our first glimpse of the tower through the trees, a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky, its windows reflecting the last crimson rays of sunset like watching eyes. The sight should have brought relief after our difficult ascent, but instead, a collective shiver ran through our group. For a moment, none of us moved toward it, as if stepping into its shadow would cross some invisible threshold from which there would be no return. The Deadfall Peak lookout tower loomed above us, a stark 4-story wooden structure perched on the rocky summit. Time and weather had stripped away most of its dark green paint, leaving the bare wood underneath weathered to the color of bone. The metal staircase spiraling up its exterior creaked and swayed in the evening breeze, as if breathing. From below, I could see that several windows were broken, and the observation deck railing had partially collapsed on the north side. "It's perfect," I whispered, already framing shots in my mind. The encroaching darkness only enhanced the tower's foreboding presence. I suggested we make camp at its base and explore the interior in the morning, remembering Mrs. Fulton's warning about sunset. For once, no one argued. Setting up camp proved difficult as the ground near the tower was oddly hard, requiring extra effort to drive in the tent stakes. Throughout the process, I couldn't shake the disturbing sensation of being watched. Each time I glanced up at the tower, I expected to see a figure in the windows, but there was only darkness, a darkness that seemed deeper than the surrounding night. Dinner was a quiet affair, our usual banter replaced by tense silence. Derek kept getting up to check the perimeter, his hand never far from his knife. Naomi twitched at every sound from the forest, while Elliot meticulously recorded the day's events in his journal, his handwriting unusually erratic. "Did you guys know there was a suicide here in 1979? Naomi finally broke the silence, her voice unnaturally high. "I found an old newspaper article while researching. The lookout, a man named Raymond Caldwell, was found hanging from the observation deck after reporting abnormal atmospheric conditions for several weeks. His logbook entries became increasingly paranoid toward the end. Jesus, Naomi, read the room," Elliot muttered, but I could see he was disturbed. "Let's save the ghost stories for another time." As we prepared for bed, I noticed something odd about our campsite. Despite the random arrangement of our tents, They formed an almost perfect circle, mirroring the dead vegetation we'd found earlier. Before I could point this out, my attention was drawn to a sound that made my blood run cold. The rhythmic creak of footsteps ascending the tower's metal staircase. We all froze, eyes locked on the dark silhouette of the tower. The footsteps continued steadily upward, though I could see nothing moving on the stairs. When they reached what would be the top floor, they stopped. Seconds later, a pale light flickered in the observation room. Not the warm glow of a lantern or flashlight, but a cold, bluish illumination that pulsed like a heartbeat. "That's impossible," Derek hissed. "That tower has been abandoned for decades. There's no electricity, no one up there." But there was someone, or something. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a figure moving behind the dirty windows, tall and unnaturally thin, its movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. "We need to leave," Elliot whispered, clutching Naomi's trembling hand. "Right now." I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes from the tower. In the dark, we'd break our necks on the trail. The rational part of my brain supplied practical objections, while a deeper, primal part screamed in agreement with my brother. Whatever's up there hasn't bothered us. Maybe it's just another hiker who got here before us. Derek laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "No one's been on this trail in years, Curtis. The Forest Service closed this area after the third disappearance. I thought you knew that this was part of your edgy photography angle." Before I could process this revelation, a new sound cut through the night. A slow, deliberate scratching, like nails on glass. It was coming from inside my tent. Heart pounding, I crawled to the entrance and unzipped it with shaking hands, holding my breath as I peered inside. My camera equipment lay scattered, some pieces broken beyond repair. On the floor of the tent, gouged deep into my sleeping bag, were 3 words: "I see you." I backed out of the tent, colliding with Elliot, who had come to check on me. As I turned to explain, the words died in my throat. Beyond my brother's shoulder, at the edge of our camp, stood a figure, humanoid but wrong in proportion, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an impossible angle. Though its face was hidden in shadow, I could feel its gaze boring into me with malevolent intensity. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it darted away with inhuman speed, moving not like a person running, but like footage played in reverse, its joints bending in ways that defied anatomy. The direction it fled was unmistakable, straight toward the base of the tower. That's when the screaming started from Naomi's tent. Naomi's screams tore through the night as Elliot and I sprinted toward her tent. We found her backed against the far side, pointing at her sleeping bag where thousands of tiny black insects boiled up from inside, forming patterns that almost looked like words before dispersing and reforming. The sight was both revolting and mesmerizing. I couldn't look away even as my stomach heaved. "Get her out of there," Derek shouted, already grabbing the emergency lanterns and our day packs. "We're leaving now." The decision was made for us when the tower's spotlight, a feature that shouldn't have been operational, suddenly blazed to life, sweeping across our campsite with blinding intensity. The mechanical grind of its rotation had a purposeful quality, as if it were searching. When the beam passed over each of us, I felt a physical pressure, like being submerged in ice water. "Don't let it touch you again," Derek warned, his face ghastly in the harsh light. "I've heard stories. That light, it marks you somehow." We abandoned most of our gear, taking only essentials as we fled down the trail. The tower's spotlight followed our retreat, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move independently of our bodies. The forest around us had changed, the familiar trail now twisted in unnatural configurations, trees leaning inward as if watching our desperate flight. "Stay together," I called out as the path narrowed, forcing us into single file. I took the lead with my headlamp, Naomi behind me, then Elliot, with Derek bringing up the rear. The beam of my light revealed only a few feet ahead, the darkness beyond it absolute and hungry. That's when I noticed the silence. The normal sounds of a forest at night, insects, the rustle of nocturnal animals, even the whisper of wind through leaves, had ceased entirely. The only sounds were our labored breathing and footfalls on the rocky path. "It's hurting us," Derek suddenly announced, his voice tight with fear. "We're not going toward the trailhead anymore. Look at the stars." He was right. The constellation I'd been using to navigate had shifted position. We were heading deeper into the wilderness, toward the heart of whatever malevolence dwelled in these woods. A crashing sound behind us made me whirl around. Derek was gone, the trail empty where he'd been seconds before. Elliot played his light frantically through the trees, calling Derek's name. The only response was a distant, echoing laugh that sounded like Derek's voice but distorted, as if played through damaged speakers. "Move," I urged, grabbing Elliot's arm as he stood frozen in horror. "We can't help him if we're caught too." We had been running for what felt like hours when Naomi stumbled, crying out as her ankle twisted on a hidden root. Elliot immediately dropped beside her, but the look on his face told me what I already feared. She couldn't continue at speed. "You two hide," I decided, passing Elliot my spare flashlight. "I'll lead whatever's following us away, then circle back." "That's suicide, Curtis," Elliot hissed, but the approaching sounds, branches snapping, undergrowth being crushed by something heavy, left no time for debate. "There's a ranger station 6 miles east," I whispered urgently. "If I'm not back by dawn, get there and bring help." I didn't mention that I suspected dawn might never come in this twisted version of the forest we'd entered. Before they could argue further, I took off perpendicular to our path, making as much noise as possible. The strategy worked. I heard the pursuit change direction, following me. What I hadn't expected was to recognize the sounds chasing me. The footfalls matched my own exactly, as if I were being pursued by a perfect copy of myself. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, lungs burning. When my foot met empty air instead of solid ground, I had a moment of weightless terror before plunging down a steep ravine, tumbling through brush and over rocks until I slammed into something solid at the bottom. Metal, not stone. Dazed and bleeding, I directed my failing flashlight at the obstacle. It was a vehicle, an old Forest Service truck, its green paint barely visible under decades of accumulated grime and rust. Through the cracked windshield, I could make out a figure in the driver's seat, motionless. Fighting waves of nausea, I approached the truck. The driver's desiccated remains were still strapped in, uniform now just tattered fabric clinging to a skeleton. Clutched in its bony hands was a logbook, the pages yellowed with age. The last entry, dated October 1983, read only. "It's not the tower watching us. The tower is what keeps it contained. God help us if it ever gets out." A sudden silence descended, oppressive in its completeness. Then, from directly behind me came the sound I'd been dreading, my own breathing, perfectly mirrored, though I was holding my breath in terror. Slowly, knowing what I would see but unable to stop myself, I turned around. Standing there, wearing my face like an ill-fitting mask, was the thing from the tower. It smiled with my mouth, a smile too wide and filled with too many teeth, and spoke with my voice. "Found you." I don't remember running. I don't remember screaming. The next clear memory I have is of crashing through undergrowth, my body moving on pure animal instinct, my doppelganger's laughter echoing all around me. Every time I changed direction, it was already there, wearing my face but wrong. The features slightly asymmetrical, the expressions inhuman. My only chance was to return to the tower. Somehow, I knew this with absolute certainty, the Forest Service worker's final log entry burning in my mind. The tower didn't harbor the evil, it contained it. And we had disturbed whatever fragile balance had been maintaining that containment. Dawn was breaking, a sickly, greenish light that did nothing to warm the bone-deep chill that had settled into my body. I had been running in circles, I realized with mounting horror. No matter which direction I fled, I always ended up back where I started, near that rusted Forest Service truck with its grim occupant. "You can't leave," my voice called out from behind me. "None of you can, but only one of you needs to stay." I turned to find not my doppelganger, but Derek standing there, looking completely unharmed except for his eyes, flat and empty, like painted glass. "Derek," I whispered, taking an involuntary step backward. He smiled, too widely. Derek volunteered to show me the way out, to show me how humans work from the inside. His head tilted at that unnatural angle I'd seen before. "But he's wearing out quickly. I need someone newer." Understanding crashed over me like ice water. Whatever inhabited the tower, whatever had been contained there for decades, had taken Derek, was wearing him like a costume. And it wanted one of us as a replacement when his body failed. A scream in the distance, Naomi's voice, galvanized me into action. I sprinted toward the sound, no longer caring if the thing in Derek's body followed. I found them near the base of the tower, Elliot standing protectively in front of Naomi, facing another Derek who circled them predatorily. "Elliot," I shouted. "The tower. We need to get inside the tower." My brother's head snapped toward me, his eyes widening in confusion as he saw two versions of me emerging from different directions. The real me and my doppelganger, who had shed Derek's appearance like an unwanted coat. What followed was chaos, a nightmarish blur of running, fighting, screaming. The entity kept shifting between our forms, making it impossible to know who to trust. At one point, I found myself grappling with a perfect copy of Naomi, only to be tackled by Elliot, who believed I was the imposter. "The windows," the real Naomi suddenly shouted, pointing at the tower. "Look at the reflection. In the glass of the tower windows, our reflections showed our true forms. Mine was normal, human. The thing masquerading as Derek had no reflection at all." We made a desperate break for the tower stairs, the entity howling in rage as it realized our discovery. I pushed Naomi ahead of me, Elliot close behind. The metal steps groaned under our weight as we spiraled upward, the thing in Derek's body following more slowly now, almost leisurely, as if confident in our capture. The observation room at the top was a time capsule, dusty logbooks still open on the desk, coffee cups long dry, a jacket hanging on a hook as if its owner had just stepped out. And everywhere, covering every available surface, were symbols drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. They were containing it, Naomi whispered, her historian's mind making connections even through her terror. The lookouts weren't just watching for fires. They were guardians, keeping this thing imprisoned. Elliot moved to the logbooks, flipping through frantically. "The ritual," he muttered. "There must be instructions." The entity reached the top of the stairs, still wearing Derek's face, though the skin now hung oddly, like a suit several sizes too large. "You can't put me back," it said conversationally. "The last guardian died without passing on the knowledge. That's why I could reach out, touch your dreams, Curtis, draw you here. It had been planning this all along," I realized. The forum post I'd discovered, the anonymous email, breadcrumbs it had laid to lure someone capable of breaking the weakening seals of its prison. Elliot suddenly straightened, holding a small leather-bound book different from the official logs. "I found it," he breathed. "The ritual. It needs blood, a willing sacrifice to renew the binding." The thing wearing Derek laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "And which of you will volunteer? Which of you loves the others enough to spend eternity as my jailer, never leaving this tower, keeping me contained through sheer force of will until your body fails and your mind shatters?" Naomi stepped forward before either of us could react. "Me," she said firmly. "I'll do it." "No." Elliot lunged for his wife, but the entity was faster, impossibly fast, suddenly between them. What happened next occurred in heartbeats, but will replay in my nightmares forever. Naomi, determined to save us, slashed her palm with a shard of broken glass from the window. Elliot, desperate to stop her sacrifice, broke from my restraining grip and charged forward. The entity, sensing its imprisonment renewed, lashed out with Derek's body like a weapon. The three of them crashed through the weakened railing of the observation deck. I heard Naomi scream, saw Elliot's outstretched hand as they plummeted, the entity still clutching them both, its form already dissolving back into the amorphous darkness it truly was. I don't know how long I stood frozen at the broken railing, staring down at the unmoving forms of my brother, his wife, and my friend far below. Minutes or hours later, I became aware of a change in the air, a lifting of pressure I hadn't even realized was there until it eased. The symbols on the walls glowed briefly, pulsing like a heartbeat before fading to ordinary dried blood once more. The sacrifice had been made. The entity was contained again, at least for now. I descended the tower as the first real rays of morning sun broke over the mountain. Moving mechanically, I gathered what remained of our scattered gear. In Elliot's journal, I found his meticulous notes, including coordinates for the ranger station he'd mentioned. It took me 2 days to reach it, 2 days of looking over my shoulder, of starting at every sound. The authorities recovered the bodies. The official report cited an accident, structural failure of the observation deck, causing 3 deaths. Derek's strange behavior and our wild stories were attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camp stove, combined with altitude sickness and group hysteria. I didn't argue. How could I explain what really happened? Who would believe that something ancient and malevolent lived in that tower, contained by blood sacrifices and rituals performed by generations of fire lookouts disguised as ordinary Forest Service employees? I developed my photographs when I returned to Seattle, the few that weren't destroyed in our flight. Most showed nothing unusual, just an abandoned tower against the Oregon sky. But one, taken at dusk that first evening, shows something I didn't see when I pressed the shutter. In every window of the tower, a face watches us setting up camp. Each face is different, and yet somehow the same. Men and women spanning decades, their expressions a uniform mask of warning and grief. The previous guardians, I believe, trying to warn us away. I've sent copies of Elliot's notes and this account to several people, with instructions to open them if I disappear. Because the dreams have started again, dreams of the tower calling me back. I wake gasping for breath, my sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of metal in my mouth. I think the binding is weakening again. I think it wants me specifically this time, wants to wear my skin, use my photographer's eye to find new victims once it's free. I've changed the locks on my apartment doors and windows, installed security cameras, told my neighbors to call the police if they see anyone who looks like me trying to enter the building when I'm already inside. They think I'm suffering from PTSD after watching my brother die. Maybe I am, but I know something else is happening too. Because yesterday, I caught a glimpse of myself in my bathroom mirror. Only it wasn't my reflection staring back. It was me, but with that too wide smile filled with too many teeth, that unnatural head tilt. It winked at me before my true reflection returned. I think I'm out of time. My name is Abigail Kent. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Portland where I work as a cultural anthropologist specializing in folklore and urban legends. I've always been drawn to stories people tell to explain the unexplainable, especially those whispered around campfires with nervous glances over shoulders. It was this professional curiosity that led me to the remote fire lookout tower on Echo Ridge in the Willamette National Forest of Oregon. The Echo Ridge lookout had been officially abandoned since 1992, but unlike other decommissioned towers that became hiking destinations or rental cabins, this one remained conspicuously absent from Forest Service materials. When I dug deeper, I discovered multiple conflicting reasons for its closure: structural concerns, budget cuts, even a brief mention of unusual environmental factors that was quickly redacted from later reports. Most intriguing were the local stories about people who visited the tower and returned different. I assembled a small research team. My colleague Dr. Marcus Chun, who specialized in parapsychology despite the academic ridicule it brought him. My younger sister Vanessa, a geology student who needed field experience and frankly wouldn't take no for an answer. And Tyler Reed, a local guide who knew the area better than anyone, but whose anxious expression when I mentioned Echo Ridge should have been my first warning. We prepared meticulously for the expedition: topographical maps, satellite images, weather forecasts, emergency equipment. My university department had even secured permits for us to document the site, though the Forest Service representative had looked unusually somber when handing them over. "Just don't stay after dark," she'd said. When I asked why, she'd shaken her head. Protocol. But her eyes said something else entirely. The night before our departure, I received an anonymous package at my apartment. A small wooden box containing a tarnished hand mirror with intricate engravings around the edge. A note inside read only: "At Echo Ridge, reflections tell truths that voices cannot. Trust only what you see, not what you hear." I assumed it was from one of my folklore contacts, perhaps adding atmospheric context to the local legends. I packed the mirror without telling the others, feeling an inexplicable need to keep it private. As we loaded our gear into Tyler's weathered Bronco early that morning, I noticed he kept touching a small wooden charm hanging from his rearview mirror, a crude carving of what looked like a watchtower with symbols I didn't recognize etched into its base. When he caught me looking, he quickly tucked it out of sight. "Family tradition," he muttered. "For safe travels." The drive took us deeper into the national forest than I'd expected, the maintained roads eventually giving way to overgrown fire access routes that hadn't seen vehicles in years. Cell service disappeared hours before we reached our destination. The isolation should have felt familiar to me after years of fieldwork in remote locations, but something about these woods pressed against my consciousness like a physical weight, a sensation of being simultaneously watched and warned away. We parked at the remnants of an old ranger station and continued on foot, following what Tyler assured us was once a well-established trail, though it was now barely visible beneath years of forest reclamation. As we hiked, the usually talkative Vanessa grew uncharacteristically quiet, her eyes darting to shadows between trees where nothing should be moving. Marcus kept stopping to consult his various measuring devices, frowning at readings he wouldn't explain when I questioned him. By late afternoon, as the sunlight took on the amber quality of approaching dusk, we emerged into a clearing, and there it stood, the Echo Ridge Lookout Tower, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Tall, angular, and undeniably foreboding, its weathered frame seemed to absorb rather than reflect the fading light. The observation platform at the top gleamed oddly, and I realized with a start that every window was intact, unusual for a structure abandoned for decades in such a remote location. As we approached the base of the tower, my skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warm evening air. The sensation of being watched intensified until it was almost unbearable. Tyler hung back, making a show of checking his pack while the rest of us circled the tower's foundation. It was Marcus who noticed the strangest feature: hundreds of small mirrors of all shapes and sizes affixed to the lower support beams, positioned to reflect in every possible direction like some primitive security system. Most were clouded with age or broken, but those that remained intact reflected our faces back at us in disturbing fragmentations. "I don't like this place," Vanessa whispered, her voice unnaturally tight. "It feels wrong, Abby. Like it's humming." Before I could respond, a sharp cracking sound came from the top of the tower, glass breaking, followed by what sounded impossibly like my own voice, calling down. "Hello? Is someone there? I need help." The voice, my voice, echoed from the tower, sending ice through my veins. I instinctively grabbed Vanessa's arm, pulling her closer as we all stared up at the observation deck. Nothing moved in the windows, but the setting sun caught the glass at just the right angle to make it appear as though flames danced inside. An optical illusion, I told myself. Nothing more. "It's getting dark," Tyler announced, his voice strained with poorly concealed fear. "We should make camp and explore the tower tomorrow." The relief on everyone's faces was palpable, though none of us acknowledged the obvious. We were all suddenly reluctant to set foot inside despite having traveled specifically for this purpose. We chose a spot about 50 yards from the tower base, close enough for research purposes, but far enough to ease our inexplicable anxiety. Setting up camp proved more difficult than anticipated. Our equipment seemed to develop sudden, inexplicable defects. Tent poles that wouldn't fit together correctly, a camp stove that refused to light despite a full fuel canister, flashlights flickering despite fresh batteries. Most disturbing was the discovery that all our watches had stopped at different times, yet all showing the same minute, 37. Even our digital devices displayed impossible timestamps. "Electromagnetic anomalies," Marcus suggested, but his scientific confidence sounded hollow as he repeatedly checked his malfunctioning equipment. Actually fairly common around certain geological formations. Vanessa shot him a skeptical look, but didn't contradict him, instead focusing intensely on securing her tent as if proper knots could protect against whatever had us all on edge. As twilight deepened into true darkness, I noticed Tyler arranging small objects in a circle around our campsite: river stones, bits of wood, and what looked like salt poured in thin lines. Catching my questioning look, he simply said, "Precautions," and continued his work with methodical precision. I didn't press him, finding strange comfort in these ritual protections regardless of their efficacy. Sleep proved elusive despite our physical exhaustion from the hike. I lay awake in my tent, listening to the forest sounds that seemed to carry unnatural clarity. The rustle of leaves without wind, branch creaks that might be footsteps, and occasionally, disconcertingly, what sounded like whispered conversations in familiar voices just beyond the nylon walls of my tent. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed of endless stairs spiraling upward, each landing showing reflections of myself at different ages, the oldest versions warning me away in desperate pantomime since their voices made no sound. I woke abruptly before dawn to absolute silence. The typical pre-morning forest ambience, insects, nocturnal animals returning to dens, early birds, all absent, creating a vacuum of sound that felt deliberately expectant. Outside my tent, a thick mist had settled over our campsite, reducing visibility to mere feet and diffusing my headlamp's beam into a useless glow. More concerning was the discovery that Tyler's protective circle had been disturbed during the night. The stones rearranged into a straight line pointing directly at the tower like an arrow or invitation. Marcus emerged from his tent looking haggard, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from what was clearly a restless night. "Did you hear them?" he asked without preamble. "The voices? They kept saying we need to go up, that they've been waiting for us." Before I could respond, Vanessa burst from her tent, her face pale with fear. "Something was in my tent last night," she said, her voice trembling. "Something heavy was sitting on my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was just watching me." She thrust her field journal toward me, open to reveal pages covered in writing that was recognizably her handwriting, but completely foreign to her usual style. Cramped, desperate scrawls repeating the same phrase over and over. "The mirrors never lie, but the tower does." Tyler approached from the direction of the woods, his expression grim. "The trail we came in on is gone," he announced flatly, completely overgrown like it never existed. "I can't find our route back to the vehicle." A sense of isolation crashed over me. We were effectively trapped, at least temporarily. As the group's leader, I forced decisiveness into my voice. "We'll stick to the original plan. Document the tower, collect our data, and figure out an exit strategy. The Forest Service knows our location. If we don't check in by our designated time, they'll send someone." I didn't mention that our check-in was scheduled for 3 days from now, or that our satellite phone had joined the list of malfunctioning equipment. As morning progressed, the mist receded enough to reveal the tower standing sentinel over our camp. In daylight, it should have seemed less intimidating, but something about its angles now appeared subtly wrong, as if assembled according to some non-Euclidean geometry that hurt my eyes when I tried to trace its lines. More disturbing were the windows. I could have sworn there were 12 yesterday, 3 on each side of the observation deck, but today I counted 15, with the new additions arranged in a pattern that made no architectural sense. We approached the tower entrance as a group, nobody willing to voice the collective dread that had settled over us. The padlock on the door hung broken, the metal sheared cleanly as if cut with precision tools rather than rusted through with age. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward, the metal steps worn in the center from decades of use. Yet contrary to what we'd expect from an abandoned structure, there was no dust, no debris, no signs of animal habitation, just immaculate emptiness that seemed deliberately maintained. As we began our ascent, I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the handheld mirror I'd received, drawing strange comfort from its solid presence. The first thing I noticed was how our footsteps echoed wrongly, returning to our ears seconds after they should have, creating the disorienting impression that someone was following us up the stairs. The second thing, far more terrifying, was the realization that while I could see 4 distinct shadows cast by our group on the wall of the stairwell, I could hear 5 sets of footsteps in our echoing climb toward whatever waited above. The observation room at the top of the tower struck me immediately as wrong, impossibly larger inside than the exterior dimensions could allow. Spanning at least 30 feet in each direction, the space contained an antique fire-spotting apparatus in the center, surrounded by continuous windows offering 360-degree views of the surrounding forest. The glass panes reflected our group with disturbing clarity, but something about our reflections seemed subtly altered, expressions slightly different, postures more rigid, eyes tracking movements independently of our actual bodies. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus murmured, pacing the perimeter with measuring tools. "The interior volume exceeds the exterior by approximately 40%. He ran his hands along the walls, tapping occasionally as if searching for hidden spaces. "And the acoustics are all wrong. Sound doesn't travel correctly in here." He was right. Words seemed to hang in the air after being spoken, syllables stretching and distorting before fading. Even more disturbing was how our voices sometimes continued speaking fragments of sentences we hadn't uttered, as if the room were completing our thoughts independently. The center of the observation room held an old wooden desk covered with logbooks, their pages yellowed but perfectly preserved. I began examining them while the others continued investigating the space. The entries started normally enough: weather conditions, visibility reports, routine observations of the surrounding wilderness. But around 1986, the notes became increasingly erratic. References to movements between the trees and visitors in the glass appeared with growing frequency. The final entry, dated October 17, 1992, consisted of a single sentence: "They're coming through the mirrors tonight. God forgive me for what I've done to keep them here." "Abby, you need to see this," Vanessa called from across the room. She stood before a section of wall covered with photographs, dozens of Polaroids showing different people in the tower throughout the decades. The disturbing element wasn't immediately obvious until she pointed it out. In every photo, no matter when it was taken or who was pictured, the same figure appeared in a reflection or shadow, a tall, gaunt form with features that seemed to shift when viewed directly, standing just behind the subject. Tyler had grown increasingly agitated as we explored, constantly checking his watch despite its obvious malfunction. "We need to leave," he announced suddenly, his voice cracking with stress. "Now, before sunset. This place, it thins at night." "Thins?" Marcus asked. "The barrier," Tyler replied cryptically, already moving toward the stairs. "My grandfather worked Forest Service. He told me stories about this tower, about what happened to the last lookout crew. Said they found mirrors nailed over every reflective surface, the windows painted black, and the crew." He swallowed hard. "They found them staring at their own reflections in buckets of water, their eyes gouged out, repeating, 'We had to stop seeing them come through' over and over." As if triggered by his words, every reflective surface in the room, the windows, the metal fixtures, even the glossy covers of the logbooks, simultaneously darkened, as though a shadow had passed over the sun. But outside, the sky remained clear. The darkness was coming from within the reflections themselves, spreading like ink through water. I pulled out the antique mirror I'd received, finding its surface still clear when everything else had darkened. In its reflection, I could see things the naked eye missed: faint, translucent figures emerging from the larger windows, human in shape, but wrong in proportion and movement. They unfolded into the room like origami creations reversing themselves, their paper-thin bodies gaining substance with each passing second. "Don't look at the reflections," I shouted, but too late for Marcus, who stood transfixed before a window, his hand reaching out as if to touch his own darkened image. His reflection reached back, except its arm extended impossibly far, stretching beyond the confines of the glass, fingers elongating into blade-like points that pierced the boundary between reflection and reality. Marcus screamed as his reflection's hand emerged into our world, grasping his outstretched wrist with enough force to draw blood. He tried to pull away, but where their flesh connected, a disturbing merger began, his skin becoming glossy and flat where the reflection touched him, while the reflection gained depth and substance from him. Tyler reacted instantly, pulling a hunting knife from his belt and slashing at the partially materialized arm. The blade passed through it like smoke, but the creature recoiled anyway, retreating back into the glass which cracked in a spiderweb pattern from the point of contact. Marcus collapsed, clutching his wrist where perfect, mirror-like patches now replaced his skin. "They're coming through," Tyler gasped, backing toward the stairs. "The mirror folk. This tower was built to keep them contained, the reflection world separate from ours. But the barriers weaken over time without guardians." As if confirming his words, every reflective surface in the room began to ripple like disturbed water. More figures pushed against the thinning membrane between worlds, their features becoming clearer, identical to us in form, but with expressions of predatory hunger that none of us wore. Most terrifying was watching our reflections move independently, beckoning us closer with gestures both familiar and wrong. Vanessa, closest to the stairwell, suddenly cried out in pain. Looking down, I saw water pooling around our feet, rising from nowhere yet everywhere, each puddle becoming a miniature portal as reaching hands emerged from the reflective surface. One had wrapped around my sister's ankle, the skin where it touched turning mirror smooth as it began pulling her downward. I reacted without thinking, swinging my backpack in a wide arc that splashed through the water, disrupting the reflections momentarily. The hand released Vanessa, but the water continued rising, now nearly ankle deep and reflecting a version of the observation room that wasn't ours. One where the walls dripped with mercury-like substance and the ceiling opened to a sky filled with geometric impossibilities instead of clouds. "The stairs," I shouted, pulling Vanessa toward the exit. "We need to get below." But as we turned to escape, we found ourselves facing ourselves. Four perfect duplicates blocked the stairwell, identical in every detail except for their eyes, which reflected light like polished metal, and their smiles, which stretched too wide across their faces. "You're in our world now," my duplicate said in my voice, though her lips moved wrong, as if language were an ill-fitting costume. "We've been trapped in reflections for so long. It's your turn now." Moving with unnatural coordination, our duplicates began advancing as the water level continued rising, now halfway to our knees. Behind us, more mirror entities emerged from every reflective surface, the barriers between worlds dissolving with each passing moment. We were surrounded, the only clear space remaining in the center of the room, beside the fire-spotting apparatus that now rotated slowly on its own, its brass fittings gleaming despite the unnatural darkness descending. It was then I noticed something crucial. The ancient device wasn't just for spotting fires. Its lenses and mirrors were arranged in a pattern identical to the protective symbols Tyler had placed around our camp, but vastly more complex. This tower wasn't just an observation post. It was a machine designed to maintain the boundary between worlds, powered by light and reflection. And as the last ray of natural sunlight struck its primary lens, I finally understood what we needed to do, and the terrible price at least one of us would need to pay to reseal the breach. "The spotting scope," I shouted above the increasing cacophony of distorted voices, our voices echoing around us. "It's not just for fires, it's a focal point." I pushed through the rising water, now knee-deep and viscous as mercury, each step requiring tremendous effort as the liquid seemed determined to hold us in place. The mirror entities continued emerging from every reflective surface, gaining solidity with each passing second. Marcus grasped my meaning immediately, scientist's mind cutting through his terror. A lens array, designed to focus and redirect energy. He splashed toward the apparatus, hands trembling as he examined its intricate arrangement of mirrors and prisms. "It needs light, powerful light, to activate." "The flares," Tyler called, already struggling with his waterlogged backpack. We'd packed emergency magnesium flares capable of burning even in rain or snow. In this context, they might provide the intense light source needed to power the ancient device. Our duplicates recognized our plan instantly, moving with unnerving synchronicity to block Tyler's access to his pack. His double reached him first, hands clasping around his throat with impossible strength. Where those mirrored fingers touched his skin, they began merging, reflection consuming reality inch by inch. Tyler screamed, the sound garbled as his vocal cords partially transformed into reflective surface. Vanessa reacted with instinctive ferocity, swinging the heavy metal flashlight from her belt in a wide arc that connected with the duplicate's head. The creature didn't bleed. Instead, its face shattered like glass where struck, fragments falling into the water where each piece began forming into miniature versions of Tyler's face, all screaming silently as they dissolved. The attack bought us seconds, but cost us dearly. The violence against one duplicate triggered a frenzy in the others. They abandoned their measured approach, lunging toward us with arms elongating impossibly, fingers extending into glass-like talons. My own duplicate fixed me with a hatred so intense it felt like a physical blow. Her voice, my voice, hissing, "We've waited decades for new vessels. Yours will be mine." Marcus reached the firefinder first, his scientific precision an advantage as he quickly assessed its mechanism. "It's designed to direct light in specific patterns," he shouted. "Like a code or combination lock. We need to know the sequence." My hand closed around the antique mirror in my pocket, the only reflective surface that hadn't turned dark or become a portal. Looking into it showed me not my own face, but a series of numbers scratched into the backing. October 17th, 92. The date of the final logbook entry. October 17th, 1992. I called to Marcus. Try setting the directional indicators to those numbers. As he worked, I pulled Vanessa behind me, using my body as a shield as our duplicates closed in. The water had risen to mid-thigh now, its surface perfectly reflective despite the churning chaos beneath, a membrane between worlds growing thinner by the second. Tyler had managed to retrieve 3 flares from his pack before his duplicate renewed its attack, this time joined by Vanessa's mirror twin. They moved with fluid grace through the heavy water that slowed our every motion, their bodies seemingly unaffected by physical limitations. Tyler tossed the flares toward Marcus before his double tackled him, both figures disappearing beneath the mercurial surface in a violent splash. "Tyler!" Vanessa screamed, lunging toward where he'd gone under. I grabbed her arm, holding her back with desperate strength. "The flares!" I shouted. "Get them to Marcus. It's our only chance." The water where Tyler had disappeared began to change, its surface bulging upward as something large rose from below. What emerged wasn't Tyler, nor was it his duplicate. It was a horrific amalgamation of both, their bodies partially fused where they'd grappled beneath the surface. 2 faces shared portions of the same skull, for arms ending in hands that were half flesh, half mirror fighting for control of the same torso. The Tyler portion of this monstrous merger locked eyes with me, his expression beyond terror, beyond pain, conveying a single desperate plea. "End this." Vanessa reached Marcus with 2 of the flares, the third lost in the confusion. As she handed them over, her reflection suddenly lunged from a nearby window, passing partially through the glass, like it was merely heavy curtain. The duplicate grabbed Vanessa's arm, yanking her toward the window with impossible strength. Where their flesh connected, the same terrible merging began, Vanessa's skin becoming reflective, her duplicate gaining substance. "Light them now," I screamed, fighting my way toward them against the increasingly solid water. My own duplicate tracked my movements perfectly, anticipating each dodge and turn. Looking directly at her froze me in place. It was like seeing myself completely stripped of empathy or restraint, every darker impulse I'd ever suppressed given form and purpose. Marcus struck the first flare, its magnesium core igniting with blinding intensity. He positioned it precisely within the firefinder's primary lens array, his hands moving with surprising certainty despite his terror. The effect was immediate. Light amplified and split through the complex arrangement of prisms, projecting a geometric pattern across the walls of the tower. Where these beams touched the emerging entities, they recoiled as if burned, their substance becoming less stable. "The second one," I called, nearly reaching him now. "Set it to the minute, 37. My duplicate realized the danger an instant too late, lunging forward with inhuman speed. Her mirror hand plunged into my shoulder, the pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just physical agony, but existential violation as my very being began merging with hers. Through our connection, I glimpsed her world, an inverted reality of endless reflections where nothing was original, everything a copy of something from our world. They weren't just trying to break through, they were trying to escape an existence of eternal mimicry. Marcus ignited the second flare, aligning it with trembling hands. The pattern on the walls shifted, intensified, began pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the tower itself. The structure groaned, wood and metal vibrating at frequencies that made my teeth ache and vision blur. The water level began to recede, not draining away but being pulled back into the reflective surfaces it had emerged from, carrying smaller entities with it. My duplicate screamed in frustration, our connection allowing me to feel her desperation, her rage at being forced back into imprisonment. The partial merge between us had created a feedback loop of sensation and emotion. I could feel myself being pulled toward the large observation window with her, my body becoming lighter, less substantial where we connected. "The third flare," Marcus shouted, looking around frantically. "We need the third flare to complete the sequence." The flare had fallen into the now receding water, its red casing barely visible as it rolled toward the abomination that Tyler had become. The merged creature that was two people trapped in one mutating form spotted it, and I witnessed an internal battle as the human part of Tyler fought for control of their shared motor functions. With tremendous effort, he managed to direct one of their arms to grab the flare, lifting it from the water. "Throw it," I gasped, fighting against the pull of my duplicate who now had both hands inside my chest, our ribs beginning to interconnect like puzzle pieces. I could feel myself fading, my consciousness stretching between two bodies, two worlds. Tyler's human, I met mine one last time, a look of absolute determination replacing his fear. Instead of throwing the flare to Marcus, he activated it himself, the magnesium core bursting into brilliant light. Then, with a howl that contained both human agony and inhuman rage, he hurled himself through the largest window, taking his mirror duplicate and the critical third flare with him. The glass shattered outward in a glittering explosion as Tyler's merged form plummeted from the tower, trailing light from the flare like a falling star. The moment the flare's light hit open air outside the tower's containment, a shockwave of energy pulsed through the structure. Every mirror, every reflective surface in the room simultaneously cracked, including the patches of mirrored flesh where my duplicate connected to me. Our connection severed violently, the mirror entity shrieking as she was dragged backward into the fractured window, her form elongating grotesquely before snapping back like an overstretched rubber band. The sudden separation sent me crashing to the floor, portions of my shoulder and chest now glittering with embedded mirror shards where we'd begun to merge. Marcus helped me to my feet as the tower continued vibrating at that impossible frequency. Vanessa had collapsed near the stairwell, one arm transformed almost to the elbow into reflective surface, now cracked and leaking a silver substance that evaporated upon contact with air. Through the broken windows, we could see the forest below, where Tyler's body lay broken on the rocks, the flare still clutched in his hand, burning with supernatural intensity. "We need to leave," Marcus urged, already half carrying Vanessa toward the stairs. "The tower's realigning the boundaries between worlds. I don't think it's stable." He was right. The observation room was changing before our eyes, dimensions shifting in ways that defied comprehension. Spaces expanded and contracted, angles bent impossibly, and through the cracks in every reflective surface, I could see desperate hands reaching through, gradually being pulled back by an unseen force as the barriers reasserted themselves. We stumbled down the spiraling staircase, each step seeming both longer and shorter than it should be, the tower's internal geometry fluctuating wildly. Behind us, the observation room collapsed in on itself with a sound like 1,000 mirrors shattering simultaneously. Not physically collapsing, but folding somehow, space itself creasing along invisible seams as the room compressed into dimensions that couldn't exist in our reality. When we finally burst through the tower's door into fading daylight, the structure behind us bore little resemblance to what we'd entered hours before. It twisted upward like a distorted helix, windows placed where no architect would design them, stairs visible through walls that should have been solid. At its top, where the observation room had been, a vortex of light cycled through patterns identical to those projected by the firefinder apparatus, growing more intense with each rotation. "Run!" I gasped, pulling my sister and Marcus away from the tower as the ground beneath it began to tremble. We made it perhaps 50 yards before collapsing from exhaustion and injury, turning back to witness what happened next. The tower didn't explode or disintegrate as I half expected. Instead, it seemed to invert itself, folding inward from all directions simultaneously, the entire structure imploding with perfect silence into a singularity that hung suspended for one breathless moment before winking out of existence entirely. Where the tower had stood for decades, nothing remained. No debris, no foundation, not even an indentation in the earth. Only a perfectly circular patch of ground, smooth as glass and faintly reflective in the last light of sunset. We huddled together in shocked silence as darkness fell over the clearing where the Echo Ridge Lookout had once stood sentinel against threats most people couldn't imagine. In my pocket, the antique mirror I'd received had transformed, its reflective surface now replaced with ordinary glass through which nothing unusual could be seen. The only evidence of our ordeal was Vanessa's partially transformed arm, Marcus's mirrored patches of skin, and the fragments embedded in my chest that caught the moonlight as we began the long walk back to civilization, following a trail that had mysteriously reappeared with the tower's disappearance. I look at my reflection differently now, approaching mirrors with caution most find strange. Sometimes, when light hits just right, I catch glimpses through the mirror shards embedded in my flesh, flashes of that inverted world where my duplicate remains imprisoned, watching me with my own eyes, waiting for the barriers between worlds to thin once more. 3 months have passed since Echo Ridge. The physical evidence of our ordeal has not faded with time. If anything, it has worsened. The mirror fragments in my chest have spread slowly outward, creating a silvery constellation beneath my skin that doctors mistake for an unusual scarring condition. Vanessa's transformed arm remains unnaturally reflective to the elbow, requiring her to wear long sleeves regardless of weather to avoid unwanted attention. Marcus has disappeared entirely. His university office cleared out, his apartment vacant, his family receiving cryptic postcards from locations progressively more remote. We survived, but at devastating cost. Tyler's death was officially ruled an accident, a fall while hiking in unfamiliar terrain. The authorities never found the tower, of course. The coordinates we provided led search teams to an empty clearing with no evidence any structure had ever stood there. Our statements were attributed to trauma and environmental disorientation, our injuries to the same fall that killed Tyler. The Forest Service records of Echo Ridge Lookout had vanished as completely as the tower itself, leaving us with a truth no one would believe. Vanessa and I initially stayed together in my Portland apartment, finding comfort in shared understanding of our experience. We established routines to manage our new reality, covering all mirrors before sunset, avoiding reflective surfaces during certain lunar phases when the boundaries felt thinner, documenting changes in our conditions with clinical detachment. But as weeks passed, I noticed disturbing changes in my sister beyond her mirrored arm. She began talking in her sleep, carrying on conversations with someone I couldn't see. Twice I caught her sitting motionless before the bathroom mirror at 3:37 a.m. precisely. The glass fogged everywhere except a perfect circle through which she whispered to her reflection. When confronted, she had no memory of these episodes. Most concerning was her insistence that Tyler wasn't dead, that he was between, trying to warn us about something still coming. The final incident came during a thunderstorm 6 weeks after our return. A power surge caused every electronic device in the apartment to activate simultaneously. TV screens, computer monitors, even the refrigerator's digital display, each showing not their normal functions, but reflections of rooms we weren't in, populated by figures with our faces wearing expressions of malevolent anticipation. Vanessa approached the television as if hypnotized, her mirrored arm extended toward the screen where her duplicate waited with arms similarly outstretched. I tackled her before contact was made, but the violent motion sent us crashing into the floor-length mirror in the hallway, shattering it. Each fragment continued showing the same scene, our duplicates watching, waiting, before going dark. The next morning, Vanessa was gone, leaving only a note. They're showing me how to bring Tyler back. Don't try to find me. Her phone remained, along with all identification. The only item missing beyond her clothing was the broken hand mirror I'd received before our expedition, which she'd taken to carrying as a talisman. I spent weeks searching, filing missing persons reports that generated no leads, contacting every hospital and shelter in the Pacific Northwest. Eventually, a package arrived containing Vanessa's journal, its pages filled with intricate diagrams of the tower's optical mechanism and fragmented writings about refraction points, where our world and the mirror realm intersect. The return address led to an abandoned house in Astoria, its windows covered with aluminum foil, its bathroom mirror shattered but carefully reassembled on the floor in a pattern matching the firefinder's lens arrangement. Locals reported seeing a young woman who matched Vanessa's description purchasing dozens of mirrors from secondhand stores before disappearing. One elderly shopkeeper mentioned her companion, a tall man with something wrong with his skin, like parts of him were made of glass. The description matched Marcus so precisely that I drove through the night to investigate, only to find the house empty save for evidence of elaborate optical experiments and walls covered with mathematical formulas calculating angles of reflection. I've continued my academic work, refocusing my research entirely on folklore involving mirrors, reflections, and doppelgangers across cultures. The patterns are undeniable once you know what to look for: centuries of warnings disguised as superstition, the collective human instinct to cover mirrors during thunderstorms or after deaths, the fear of seeing oneself in multiple reflections simultaneously. These weren't mere superstitions, but hard-earned knowledge about weaknesses in the membrane between worlds. Last week, I received a postcard showing the Tillamook State Forest. The message, in Vanessa's handwriting, contained just 4 words: "Found another tower." Coming through. The most disturbing element wasn't the message itself, but the postmark date: 3 weeks in the future. Yesterday, every mirror in my house revealed the same image regardless of angle. A half-constructed fire lookout tower in a clearing I recognized from my research as abandoned decades ago, after inexplicable phenomena drove workers away. In each reflection, 3 figures worked on the structure: Vanessa, Marcus, and someone wearing Tyler's face, but moving all wrong, its joints bending in impossible directions as it hammered mirrored glass into the framework. I've packed my car with specific equipment: ultra-bright LED flashlights, prisms, and the antique fire-spotting scope I acquired from a Forest Service auction last month. The mirror fragments in my chest ache constantly now, pulsing in rhythm with lunar cycles and growing more reflective as I approach the coordinates on Vanessa's postcard. The roads leading to this forgotten corner of Tillamook State Forest are barely maintained, reminiscent of our journey to Echo Ridge. As I navigate the final miles, my radio cycles through stations by itself, fragments of voices, sometimes my own, breaking through static with warnings I can no longer ignore. Don't come. We didn't understand. The towers aren't prisons, they're gateways. I arrive at dusk, that dangerous threshold when boundaries weaken. The half-constructed tower stands in a perfect clearing, its framework a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky. Unlike Echo Ridge's weather-worn structure, this tower gleams with newness, every surface covered with mirrors positioned at precise angles. It's not just similar to the original tower, it's an exact replica, but inverted somehow, its design a perfect negative of what we encountered. No sign of Vanessa or Marcus greets me, though evidence of recent activity litters the site: tools arranged in symbolic patterns, food still warm in containers, a generator humming quietly to power work lights that illuminate the structure from calculated positions. Most disturbing is the notebook open on a makeshift table, containing photographs of us at Echo Ridge, taken from perspectives that weren't ours, as if someone had been documenting our expedition from the other side of every reflection. As I approach the tower's base, the mirror fragments in my chest burn like frozen fire. Through this pain comes clarity. The shards aren't just embedded in my flesh. They've become conduits, connecting me permanently to the reflection realm. Through them, I can sense the tower's true purpose with devastating certainty: not to strengthen the barriers between worlds, but to dissolve them completely. I begin setting up my equipment with trembling hands, arranging prisms and the fire-spotting scope to counter whatever ritual Vanessa and Marcus have initiated. The original tower contained entities. This inverted replica is designed to release them. My sister hasn't been trying to rescue Tyler. She's been deceived by something wearing his reflected image, convinced to help build a permanent bridge between realms. Night falls completely as I work, the moon rising full and heavy above the clearing. The moment its light touches the tower's mirrored surfaces, the structure comes alive, light ricocheting between panels in accelerating patterns, creating a visual frequency that makes reality itself vibrate around me. The air thins, becomes permeable, as the veil between worlds stretches to transparency. And they step through, not just our duplicates, but dozens of mirror entities emerging from every reflective surface, their movements elegant and terrible as they solidify in our atmosphere. Leading them is the figure wearing Tyler's face, now fully formed and horrifyingly wrong. A perfect copy in every detail except the eyes, which remain reflective pools of mercury. Behind him comes Vanessa, her transformation nearly complete. Human from the waist down, but above that, her flesh has the perfect smoothness of polished glass. Her face shifts between her own features and something else, something older that merely wears her expression like an ill-fitting mask. Marcus follows, so thoroughly merged with his duplicate that he exists in a constant state of flux, his form rippling between solid and reflective with each breath. We brought him back, Vanessa says, her voice resonating strangely, as if spoken simultaneously in two different acoustic spaces. But we learned the truth, Abby. There's no them versus us. There's only reflection and reality, twin aspects of the same existence seeking reunification. The towers were built by those who feared harmonization, Marcus adds, his scientific precision now applied to mystical certainty. Primitives who couldn't understand that separation is the true aberration. We've always been meant to merge. I activate my assembled contraption, directing focused beams of light through the fire-spotting scope's prism array, creating counterpatterns to the tower's pulsing energies. For a moment, the emerging entities falter, their forms becoming less stable where my light touches them. You still don't understand, the thing wearing Tyler's face says, approaching with unnatural grace. You think we're invading, but we're returning. Your world was split from ours eons ago, an experiment in corporeal existence by beings who once existed solely as light and reflection. The towers were built by those who wished to maintain the separation. We are simply healing an ancient wound. As if to demonstrate, he places his hand against my chest where the mirror shard's constellation spreads beneath my skin. The contact isn't painful. Instead, perfect clarity floods through me. I see everything. The original sundering of one realm into two, the symbiotic relationship between our worlds, how each reflection entity yearns for the tactile experiences only physical form can provide, while humans unconsciously seek the perfect permanence of reflected existence. The revelation staggers me. We aren't facing enemies but incomplete halves of a greater whole. Yet, even understanding this truth, I cannot ignore what complete merging would mean. The end of humanity as we know it, consuming our physicality to achieve a new state of existence. My hand closes around the final component of my defensive array, the antique mirror from before Echo Ridge, now transformed into ordinary glass. In this moment of connection, I finally understand its significance. It wasn't a warning. It was a key, the final piece needed not to separate the worlds permanently, but to control the merger on our terms. With sudden certainty, I placed the mirror at the focal point of my assembled prisms. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. Light explodes outward in concentric rings, catching every mirror entity in mid-manifestation. But instead of banishing them back to their realm, the light freezes the process halfway, suspending us all in a state between reflection and reality. Time stops. In this liminal space, I face my duplicate directly, no longer a predatory copy, but the other half of my complete self. We reach for each other not in violence, but recognition, understanding at last that neither can exist properly without the other, yet neither should dominate. Balance, I whisper, our voices synchronizing perfectly. Not separation or consumption. The tower shudders, its structure reconfiguring itself once more. The mirrors realign, creating not a barrier or gateway, but a regulated membrane. Permeable but controlled, allowing communication and limited exchange without full merging. The pattern is sustainable, self-regulating, derived from the original design, but evolved beyond its binary purpose of imprisonment versus invasion. As reality reasserts itself, I find myself standing alone in the clearing. The tower remains, but transformed, half physical structure, half reflected image that shifts depending on perspective. Of Vanessa, Marcus, and the Tyler entity, there is no sign in the physical world, though I catch glimpses of them in the tower's mirrored surfaces, watching from the other side with expressions of profound peace. The mirror fragments in my chest have changed as well, no longer spreading. They've stabilized into a precise pattern that I recognize from the Firefinder's lens arrangement. I've become a walking anchoring point, neither fully human nor reflection, but something necessary to maintain the new equilibrium between worlds. I return to my academic work with renewed purpose, documenting the truth in academic papers disguised as folklore analysis, establishing a network of those sensitive to thinning points between realms. We locate and modify the remaining towers across remote wilderness areas, converting each from barrier to regulated threshold. Sometimes, on specific nights when the conditions are just right, I visit the Tillamook Tower and see Vanessa on the other side of the glass. We place our palms against the cool surface separating us, mirror images perfectly aligned. She seems at peace with her choice, having found purpose in a realm where her transformed nature makes her not a monster, but a pioneer. The mirror fragments in my chest no longer ache. Instead, they hum with gentle warmth when I approach reflective surfaces, reminding me of my dual nature and responsibility. I've learned to live between worlds, guardian of a truth too strange for most to comprehend, that every reflection contains another reality, watching us with our own eyes, neither enemy nor friend but essential counterpart in the symmetry of existence. In quiet moments, I still catch movement in mirrors from the corner of my eye, figures walking through rooms I'm not in, wearing my face, but living different lives. I no longer fear them. We observe each other across the thinning veil, custodians of twin realities, forever separated, yet eternally connected through silvered glass and structured light. After all, what is a reflection but a story told from the other side of the mirror? I'm Elias Whitaker, 32 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. My life's mostly city noise, coffee shops, traffic, deadlines at my graphic design gig. But last summer, I craved escape, so I planned a solo camping trip to Umpqua National Forest. I'd heard about an old fire lookout tower, abandoned for decades, perched on a ridge with killer views. Sounded like the perfect spot to unplug. I packed my beat-up Jeep with a tent, some instant noodles, and my grandpa's old hunting knife for good measure. The drive down was peaceful, winding through thick pines, the air smelling like sap and freedom. I felt alive, like I was stepping into a postcard. My buddies, Nora and Calvin, were supposed to join but bailed last minute. Nora's a nurse with a crazy schedule, and Calvin's just flaky. So, it was just me, my Jeep, and the wild. The forest swallowed the highway's hum as I pulled into a gravel lot near the trailhead. My phone had one bar, then none, which was fine. I wanted to be off the grid. The hike to the lookout tower was steep, my boots crunching on pine needles. I passed a rusted sign warning about bears, which made my stomach twist, but I shook it off. Bears don't climb towers, right? The air was crisp, and I could see my breath by the time I reached the ridge. The tower loomed ahead, a skeletal frame against the sunset, its windows dark like empty eyes. It was creepy, sure, but I figured it was just the vibe of an old structure. I set up my tent 100 yards away, near a small creek. The gurgle of water was soothing, like a lullaby. I built a fire, cracked open a beer, and let the quiet sink in. As night fell, the forest felt different. Not scary, exactly, but heavy, like it was watching me. I chalked it up to being alone in the middle of nowhere. I'm no stranger to camping, grew up doing it in the Cascades, but this place had a weird edge. Maybe it was the tower, standing there like a forgotten sentinel. I crawled into my tent, zipped it tight, and scrolled through my offline playlist. My phone's battery was already at 60%, which annoyed me. Should have brought a power bank. I drifted off to Johnny Cash's low growl, the fire's embers glowing outside. Dreams came fast, vivid ones of climbing the tower's rickety steps, each one creaking louder than the last. In the dream, something was waiting at the top, but I couldn't see it. Morning hit with a damp chill. I crawled out, stretching my stiff back, and noticed my fire pit looked messed up, like something had kicked through the ashes. Probably a raccoon, I told myself, though it felt off. The tower looked less inviting in daylight, its paint peeling like dead skin. I decided to check it out later. Curiosity was nagging me. For now, I boiled water for coffee and munched on a granola bar. The forest was alive with birds, but their chirps felt muted, like they were holding back. I kept glancing at the tower, half expecting to see someone in the windows. Nobody was there, of course. Just my imagination running wild, right? I shook my head, laughing at myself. City boy getting spooked by nothing. I spent the day exploring, following a faint trail that looped around the ridge. Found some old beer cans, probably from teenagers partying years ago. It made me think of high school, sneaking beers with friends in the woods, feeling invincible. Out here, though, I felt small. The trees were massive, blocking out the sky, and every snap of a twig made me jump. By afternoon, I was back at camp, sketching the tower in my notebook. I'm no artist, but I like doodling. It calms me. The tower's lines came out jagged, almost angry. Weird. As the sun dipped, I cooked some noodles, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. Not like a person, but something. The air got colder as night crept in. I built another fire, bigger this time, to push back the dark. The tower was just a silhouette now, but it felt closer, like it was leaning toward me. I tried to laugh it off. Come on, Elias, it's just a building. But the hairs on my neck kept standing up. I kept my knife close, not that it'd do much against whatever my brain was cooking up. I thought about Nora and Calvin, wishing they'd come. Nora's tough as nails, would have told me to quit being a wimp. Calvin would have brought his guitar, made it a party. Alone, though, every shadow felt like a threat. I zipped into my tent early, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. I lay there, staring at the tent's ceiling, listening to the creak. It sounded different tonight, less like a lullaby and more like a low whisper. I told myself it was just water over rocks, but my heart wouldn't slow down. I checked my phone, 30% battery now. Great. I turned it off to save juice. Sleep didn't come easy. Every rustle outside felt like a warning. I gripped my knife, feeling like a kid scared of the boogeyman. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it, a low, deliberate scrape, like metal on wood, coming from the direction of the tower. My blood went cold. It wasn't an animal. Too rhythmic, too intentional. I sat up, clutching the knife, ears straining. The scraping stopped, then started again, closer. My mind raced. Maybe it was the wind? A branch? But there was no wind, and the sound was too precise. I unzipped the tent a sliver, peering out. The fire was dying, casting weak light. The tower stood silent, but I swore I saw a flicker in one of its windows, like a candle flame. My heart hammered. I zipped the tent shut, telling myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a creepy old tower. Something was out there, and it wasn't friendly. I didn't sleep after that. I sat there, knife in hand, waiting for dawn. The scraping came and went, never close enough to be sure, but never far enough to ignore. By the time the sky lightened, my eyes were burning and my nerves were shot. I kept thinking about that flicker in the window. Was it real? Was I losing it? All I knew was I wasn't ready to climb that tower yet. But something told me I'd have to, sooner or later. The forest didn't feel like a postcard anymore. It felt like a trap. Morning light barely cut through the fog, clinging to the trees. My eyes felt like sandpaper after staying up all night, knife in hand, listening to that damn scraping sound. I crawled out of my tent, the air damp and heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. My fire pit was a mess again, ashes scattered, a few sticks snapped clean in half. No way a raccoon did that. I crouched down, poking at the debris, and found a weird mark in the dirt, like something sharp had been dragged through it. My gut twisted, but I told myself it was probably just a branch. Still, the whole place felt off, like the forest was warning me to pack up and go. But I'm stubborn, always have been. Leaving felt like letting the fear win. I boiled water for coffee, hands shaky from no sleep. My phone was down to 25% now, useless without signal. I cursed myself for not bringing a map. Relying on my offline GPS app was a dumb move. The tower loomed in the distance, its rusted frame looking more menacing than yesterday. I decided to hike closer, just to prove to myself it was nothing. Curiosity's a hell of a drug, you know? Like when you're a kid and you have to check the creepy basement. I strapped on my backpack, tucked my knife in my belt, and headed toward the tower. The trail was overgrown, thorns snagging my jeans. Every step felt like the forest was pushing me back. Halfway there, I found an old signpost, half buried in moss. It read, "Lookout Tower, 0.2 miles," in faded paint. Below it, someone had scratched something into the wood. Looked like a symbol, maybe a circle with lines cutting through it. It gave me the creeps, like something you'd see in a horror flick about cults. I laughed it off, but my laugh sounded hollow. I kept moving, the tower's silhouette growing sharper. The air got colder the closer I got, and the birds went quiet. Not a single chirp. That's when I noticed my bootlaces were untied, both of them. Weird, since I'd double knotted them. I stopped to fix them, my hands fumbling, and swore I felt eyes on me. The tower was worse up close. Its metal stairs were rusted, some steps bent like they'd been stomped on. The windows were cracked, some boarded up, and the whole thing creaked in the breeze. I stood at the base, looking up, my neck prickling. I told myself it was just an old building, nothing scary about it. But then I saw it. A smear of something dark on the lowest stair, like dried blood. My heart skipped. Could have been rust or paint, but it looked wrong. I thought about Nora. She'd have marched right up, no hesitation. Me? I wasn't so sure. I decided to circle the tower first, check for anything weird before climbing. Around the back, I found an old fire pit, long cold, with charred bits of what looked like fabric in it. Not clothes, exactly, more like scraps of something handmade, like a doll or a quilt. Disturbing as hell. I kicked at the ashes, and a small bone rolled out. Probably an animal, but it didn't look right. Too small, too human. My brain screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. It was like the tower was pulling me in. I pulled out my notebook, sketched the symbol from the signpost to calm my nerves. My hands were shaking so bad the lines came out wobbly. I was starting to think coming here alone was a mistake. I heard it then, a low hum, like a machine but softer, coming from inside the tower. Not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat. My skin crawled. I backed away, tripping over a root and nearly face-planting. The hum stopped the second I hit the ground, like it knew I'd noticed. I sat there, heart pounding, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just pipes or old machinery settling. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't normal. I thought about packing up and driving back to Portland, but my Jeep was a 2-hour hike away, and the sun was already dipping. No way I'd make it before dark. I headed back to camp, moving fast, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The forest felt tighter now, like the trees were closing in. When I got to my tent, my stomach dropped. My backpack, which I'd left by the creek, was open, its contents scattered, granola bars, socks, even my spare lighter. I hadn't touched it. I checked the ground for tracks, but there was nothing, just that same sharp drag mark from the fire pit. My knife felt heavy in my hand, useless against whatever was messing with me. I rebuilt the fire, piling on more wood than I needed, trying to push back the growing panic. As night fell, I sat by the fire, eyes locked on the tower's silhouette. The hum started again, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the trees. I gripped my knife tighter, my mind racing. Should I stay put? Hike out in the dark? The thought of stumbling through the forest with that hum following me was terrifying. I kept thinking about Calvin, how he'd probably make a dumb joke to lighten the mood. But alone, all I had was my own head, and it was screaming that something was very wrong. I decided to stay put till morning, but sleep was out of the question. Then, just past midnight, the hum changed. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It had a rhythm, like a chant. It was coming from the tower, no doubt about it. I stared at the dark windows, half expecting to see that flicker again. My fire was blazing, but it didn't feel like enough. Something was out there, and it wasn't just in my head. I kept my knife ready, my back to the tent, and waited for whatever came next. The fire crackled, but it did nothing to calm my nerves. That rhythmic chanting hum from the tower was louder now, weaving through the trees like a twisted lullaby. I sat frozen, knife in my sweaty grip, staring at the tower's black outline against the moonless sky. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something was out there, and it wasn't an animal or some hiker playing a prank. I kept thinking about that bone in the fire pit, the drag marks, the symbol scratched into the signpost. My mind spun with horror movie scenarios, cults, ghosts, some backwoods nightmare. But this felt real, too real. I tried to focus on the fire, the only thing keeping me grounded. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the silence was worse. Thick, like the forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a single, deliberate snap of a branch, maybe 50 yards away. My head whipped toward the sound, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the firelight. I stood up, knife raised, feeling like a cornered animal. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaky. No answer, just the creek's faint gurgle. I cursed under my breath, wishing I'd listened to my gut and left at dawn. Stupid, Elias, real stupid. I grabbed a burning stick from the fire, holding it like a torch. The light barely reached 10 feet, but I waved it toward the trees, hoping to scare off whatever was out there. That's when I saw it. A shape, just at the edge of the light, low to the ground, moving slow. Not a bear, not a person. It was wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping into the fire. The shape vanished, but I heard a low rasp, like air escaping a tire, from the same direction. My skin crawled. This was no prank. Something was hunting me. I threw more wood on the fire, my hands trembling so bad I dropped a log. The flames roared higher, and I backed toward my tent, eyes darting. The rasp came again, closer, from behind the tent now. I spun around, torch raised, but saw nothing. My mind raced. Should I run for the jeep? Stay by the fire? The tower was closer, but climbing it felt like walking into a trap. I thought of Nora, how she'd once faced down a drunk guy at a bar without flinching. I tried to channel her grit, but all I felt was terror. Whatever was out there wasn't human. I could feel it in my bones. Then the chanting started again, louder, more voices joining in, like a chorus from hell. It was definitely coming from the tower. I caught a glimpse of movement in one of the windows, a flicker, not a candle this time, but something pale, swaying. My breath hitched. I remembered a story my grandpa told about loggers in these woods, how some went missing in the 70s, their gear found scattered like mine was. I'd laughed it off as a kid, but now it felt too close to home. I gripped my knife tighter, knowing it was useless against whatever this was. I decided to move. Staying still felt like waiting to die. I stuffed my essentials, phone, lighter, a water bottle, into my backpack, keeping the torch in one hand and the knife in the other. The plan was to head for the trail, get to my jeep, and get the hell out. But as I turned, I saw them. 3 shapes, low and hunched, circling just beyond the firelight. They moved like spiders, jerky and wrong, their outlines blurry. My heart stopped. I swung the torch, and one hissed, a sound that made my blood run cold. They didn't come closer, but they didn't leave either. I bolted toward the trail, torch held high, my boots pounding the dirt. The chanting grew frantic, echoing in my skull. I glanced back and saw the shapes following, keeping pace but staying just out of sight. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like jelly, but I kept running. The trail was harder to follow in the dark, roots tripping me every few steps. I thought about my jeep, parked miles away, and how I'd never make it if these things were as fast as they seemed. The tower was closer. Maybe I could climb it, barricade myself inside. It was a desperate idea, but I was out of options. I reached the base of the tower, gasping, my torch almost burned out. The stairs looked even worse in the dark, rusted and shaky, but I didn't care. I started climbing, the metal groaning under my weight. The chanting was deafening now, vibrating through the tower's frame. Halfway up, I looked down and saw them, those shapes, gathered at the base, staring up with eyes that glowed faintly, like dying embers. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just disturbing, it was a nightmare come to life. I kept climbing, praying the door at the top wasn't locked. The air grew colder as I neared the top, the stench of rot hitting me like a punch. The chanting stopped, replaced by that rasping sound, now coming from inside the tower. I froze, one hand on the railing, my torch flickering out. Something was up there, waiting. My whole body screamed to turn back, but the things below were still there, their eyes locked on me. I was trapped, caught between whatever was in the tower and the horrors below. All I could do was move forward, one shaky step at a time. My torch was dead, just a smoldering stick now, and the stench of rot choked me as I gripped the tower's rusted railing. Those glowing-eyed things were still at the base, their rasping breaths mixing with the wind. I forced myself up the last few steps, my legs shaking like they'd give out. The door at the top was wood, warped and splintered, with a rusted padlock hanging loose. I shoved it with my shoulder, and it gave way, creaking open into darkness. The air inside was thick, like stepping into a grave. I stumbled in, slamming the door behind me, my heart hammering. I fumbled for my lighter, hands trembling so bad I nearly dropped it. The tiny flame lit up the room, and I wished it hadn't. The tower's interior was a wreck, broken glass, overturned furniture, and walls covered in scratches, like someone had clawed at them. In the corner, a pile of what looked like animal pelts was stacked, but they were too neat, too deliberate. My stomach churned. The rasping was louder now, coming from below the floorboards, like something was crawling in the walls. I backed against the door, knife raised, scanning the room. A cracked window let in a sliver of moonlight, and I saw it. A shadow moving across the floor, too long to be human. My lighter flickered, and I cursed under my breath. I needed to get out, but those things outside were still waiting. I spotted a trapdoor in the floor, probably leading to a storage crawl space. The rasping was definitely coming from there. My first thought was to barricade it, but the only thing heavy enough was a rusted desk. I dragged it over, grunting, my muscles burning. It wasn't enough. The floorboards creaked, and something thumped hard against the trapdoor, making the desk jump. I yelped, dropping my knife, and scrambled to pick it up. My mind flashed to a time I got stuck in an elevator. Same panic, same feeling of being trapped. But this was worse. This was life or death, and I was losing. The window was my only shot. I ran to it, peering out. The drop was steep, maybe 30 feet to the ground. The things below were still there, circling, their eyes glinting. I saw a rickety fire escape ladder on the tower's side, half broken but maybe climbable. It was a risk, but staying here wasn't an option. The thumping grew frantic, the trapdoor buckling. I grabbed a chair, smashed the window open, and climbed out, glass crunching under my boots. The ladder groaned as I started down, rungs bending under my weight. One snapped, and I nearly fell, my hands scraping raw on the metal. My heart was in my throat, but I kept going. Halfway down, I heard the door above splinter. Something was in the room now, its rasping filling the air. I moved faster, ignoring the pain in my hands. When I hit the ground, I sprinted for the trail, not looking back. The forest was a blur, branches whipping my face. I could hear them behind me, those things scuttling through the trees, their movements jerky and wrong. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I thought of my Jeep, my only way out, parked miles away. If I could just make it there, I'd be safe. But the forest felt alive, like it was working against me, roots snagging my boots. I tripped, face planting into the dirt. My knife flew out of my hand, lost in the dark. I scrambled up, panting, and saw them. 3 shapes, closer now, their eyes like dying coals. They weren't running, just stalking, like they knew I couldn't escape. I bolted again, my backpack bouncing, my lighter long gone. The trail was barely visible, but I kept moving, driven by pure terror. I could hear the creak now, a faint hope. If I could find my camp, maybe I could grab my keys and make a run for the Jeep. But the scuttling was getting louder, closer. I burst into the clearing where my tent stood, the fire long dead. My backpack was still there, miraculously, and I tore through it, finding my keys. The scuttling stopped, and for a second, I thought I'd lost them. Then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh. Not human, coming from the trees. My blood froze. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran for the trailhead, keys in hand, praying the Jeep was still there. The forest seemed to twist around me, paths looping in ways that didn't make sense. I kept running, ignoring the pain, the fear, the horror of it all. The Jeep came into view, parked in the gravel lot, untouched. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before unlocking the door. I jumped in, slamming it shut, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, those shapes, standing at the edge of the forest, watching. My hands shook on the wheel as I floored it, the road blurring through my tears. I didn't know if I'd escaped or if they'd let me go. All I knew was I had to keep driving. The highway stretched ahead, dark and endless. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting those eyes to appear. My phone was dead, no way to call for help. I drove toward Portland, my mind racing with what I'd seen. Those things weren't animals, weren't people. They were something else, something old and wrong, tied to that tower. I swore I'd never go back, but deep down, I wasn't sure I'd escaped at all. The forest felt like it was still with me, its grip tightening. The road hummed under my tires, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept glancing in the rear view, half expecting those glowing eyes to light up the dark. The Jeep's dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m., and I was still hours from Portland. My body ached, my scraped hands stinging on the wheel. I tried to focus on the road, on getting home, but my mind kept replaying the tower, the rasping, that guttural laugh. I thought about calling Nora when I got signal, but what would I say? Hey, I got chased by monsters in the woods. She'd think I'd lost it. Hell, I wasn't sure I hadn't. I stopped at a gas station just outside Roseburg, the neon lights harsh after the forest's darkness. The clerk, an older guy with a bored expression, barely looked up as I paid for coffee and a charger. My phone was still dead, but I plugged it in, waiting for it to come back to life. The coffee tasted like tar, but it kept me awake. I kept thinking about that symbol scratched into the signpost, the one I'd sketched in my notebook. It felt important, like a warning I'd ignored. I remembered a true crime podcast about missing hikers in Oregon, how some folks blamed cults or worse. I'd laughed it off back then. Not anymore. Back in the Jeep, my phone buzzed to life. 10% battery, no signal yet. I scrolled through my photos, finding the sketch of the symbol. It looked familiar now, like something I'd seen in a history book about old logging towns. A mark tied to some forgotten ritual, maybe. My stomach twisted. I'd been so focused on escaping, I hadn't stopped to think about what I'd left behind. My notebook, my knife, my tent, all still in the forest. Evidence I'd been there. What if those things could track me? The thought hit me like a punch, and I floored the gas, desperate to put more miles between me and that tower. The road curved through the mountains, the Jeep's headlights cutting through the fog. I kept thinking about my mistake, going to that tower alone, ignoring the signs. I should have left after the first night, when the fire pit was messed up. Hell, I should have stayed in Portland, binge-watched a show with Calvin instead. My head was foggy, exhaustion creeping in. That's when I saw it, a flicker in the road ahead, like the pale shape I'd seen in the tower's window. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, but there was nothing there. Just my mind playing tricks. Or was it? I kept driving, but the air in the Jeep felt wrong, heavy, like the forest had followed me. My phone buzzed again, a notification popping up despite the lack of signal. It was a photo, one I didn't take. It showed the tower's interior, the pile of pelts, but now there was a figure standing over them, pale and eyeless, its head tilted. My hands went cold. I swerved, nearly hitting a guardrail, and tossed the phone to the passenger seat. My heart was racing. That photo wasn't there before. I hadn't taken it. Something was messing with me, something that wasn't done. The road dipped into a valley, and the Jeep's engine started sputtering. No, not now. I pumped the gas, but it coughed and died, leaving me coasting to the shoulder. Silence hit like a hammer. I tried the key, but the engine wouldn't turn over. My phone buzzed again, another photo loading. Me, running from the tower, those shapes in the background. I screamed, throwing the phone to the floor. The air grew colder, the windows fogging up from the inside. I locked the doors, my breath visible, my hands shaking as I grabbed the charger cord, the only thing I could use as a weapon. I heard it then, that rasping sound, right outside the Jeep. The windows were too fogged to see, but I knew they were out there. I thought about running, but where? The forest stretched for miles, and those things were fast. My mind flashed to my grandpa's stories, how he'd said some places in these woods were cursed, places loggers avoided. I'd ignored him, thinking it was just old man talk. That was my deadly mistake, coming here, thinking I could handle it alone. I clutched the cord, whispering a prayer I hadn't said since I was a kid. The rasping stopped, replaced by that guttural laugh, now inside the Jeep. My blood turned to ice. I turned slowly, and there it was, in the back seat, pale and eyeless, its head tilted like in the photo. I screamed, lunging for the door, but it wouldn't open. The thing reached out, its fingers cold as death, brushing my neck. I thrashed, kicking, but it was too strong. The last thing I saw was its eyeless face, smiling, as the world went black. My Jeep, my escape, my life, gone in an instant, swallowed by the horror I'd brought upon myself. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up back in the forest, lying in the dirt near the tower. My Jeep was gone, my phone, my keys, everything. The air was heavy, the chanting faint but still there. I stumbled to my feet, my body aching, and saw the tower's door open, waiting. Those shapes were gone, but I felt them watching. I'd escaped once, but it wasn't over. They'd let me go, only to pull me back. The tragedy was mine, and the forest wasn't done with me yet. I'm Juniper Vale, 28 years old, and I live in Eugene, Oregon. I'm a barista by day, slinging lattes, but my real love is the outdoors. Last fall, I needed a break from the grind, so I planned a camping trip to Umpqua National Forest with my cousin Theo and his girlfriend, Mara. I'd heard about an old fire lookout tower near Diamond Lake, abandoned since the 80s, with a killer view of the Cascades. Sounded like the perfect spot for a weekend of stargazing and campfire stories. I loaded my trusty Subaru with gear, tent, sleeping bag, a cooler of cheap beer, and picked up Theo and Mara from their place in Roseburg. Theo's a mechanic, all charm and bad jokes, while Mara's a quiet artist who sees the world in colors I don't get. We were pumped for a chill adventure. The drive was all laughter and old playlists, Theo belting out 90s grunge like he was Kurt Cobain. Mara sketched in her notebook, humming along. The forest road got bumpy, my Subaru rattling as we climbed toward the trailhead. The air turned sharp with pine and earth, and I rolled down the windows, letting it wash over me. We parked at a gravel pullout, the tower just visible through the trees, a lonely silhouette against the orange sky. It looked eerie but cool, like something from a post-apocalyptic game. We hiked a mile to a clearing near the tower, setting up camp by a small pond. The water was still, reflecting the fading light like a mirror. I felt free, like I'd left Eugene's noise behind. Our camp came together fast, 2 tents, a fire pit, and Mara's portable speaker playing lo-fi beats. Theo cracked open a beer, tossing one to me, and we toasted to surviving the wilderness. Mara wandered off to sketch the tower, her pencil scratching away. I noticed she kept glancing at it, like it was pulling her in. The tower itself was weathered, its metal frame rusted, windows boarded or broken. I figured we'd explore it tomorrow. Theo was already hyping it up like we were ghost hunters. Night fell quick, the forest swallowing the last of the daylight. The fire's glow felt safe, but the tower loomed darker than it should have, like it was watching us. I cooked hot dogs over the fire, the smell mixing with wood smoke. Theo told a dumb story about a bear he swore he saw last summer, but Mara wasn't laughing. She was staring at the pond, her face pale. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes flicked to the tower again. I brushed it off. She's always been a bit intense. We ate, drank, and swapped stories, the fire keeping the chill at bay. I thought about my shifts back at the coffee shop, how I'd rather be here than steaming milk for cranky customers. The forest was quiet, just crickets and the occasional owl. It felt perfect, like we'd found our own little world. Then, around midnight, the vibe shifted. The crickets stopped, and the air got heavy, like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. Theo didn't notice, too busy roasting marshmallows, but Mara grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "You hear that?" she whispered. I didn't, but her fear was contagious. I strained my ears, catching a faint hum, like a distant engine, coming from the tower. It wasn't loud, just wrong, like it didn't belong. I told myself it was probably an old generator or something, but my gut said otherwise. Mara's eyes were wide, her sketchbook forgotten. Theo laughed, saying it was just the wind, but I saw him glance at the tower too. I tried to shake it off, cracking a joke about haunted towers to lighten the mood. Theo played along, but Mara stayed quiet, her gaze fixed on the pond now. I followed her eyes and saw ripples spreading across the water, slow and steady, like something had touched it. No breeze, no fish, just ripples. My skin prickled. I remembered a customer at the shop, an old guy who'd rambled about bad places in these woods, where loggers used to disappear. I'd thought he was nuts, but now I wasn't so sure. The hum grew louder, then stopped, leaving a silence that felt alive. I told everyone to hit the tents, trying to sound calm. Inside my tent, I zipped up tight, my sleeping bag suddenly feeling too thin. Theo and Mara were in their tent nearby, whispering. I could hear Theo trying to reassure her, but his voice was shaky. I lay there, staring at the tent's ceiling, the hum echoing in my head. My phone had no signal, battery at 70%. I turned it off to save power, clutching my pocket knife for comfort. It wasn't much, but it was something. I kept thinking about Mara's face, how she'd looked at the pond like she'd seen a ghost. Sleep wasn't coming, not with that hum still lingering in my mind. Then it happened, a sharp, metallic clang from the tower, like something heavy had fallen. I sat up, heart racing, listening. Another clang, slower, deliberate. I unzipped my tent a crack, peering out. The fire was low, casting long shadows. The tower stood silent, but I swore I saw movement in one of the windows, a quick flash of something pale. My breath caught. Theo poked his head out, whispering, "You hear that too?" I nodded, too scared to speak. Mara was curled up in their tent, muttering something I couldn't make out. The clanging stopped, but the air felt thicker, like it was pressing down on us. I closed my tent, knife in hand. telling myself it was just the tower settling. Old buildings make noises, right? But deep down, I knew better. The forest didn't feel like our little world anymore. It felt like a trap. I kept picturing those ripples in the pond, the way they moved without reason. Something was out there, and it wasn't friendly. I lay awake, listening for the next sound, my mind racing with what we'd find in the morning. The tower was calling us, whether we liked it or not. Morning hit like a wet blanket, the air thick with fog that clung to the trees. I crawled out of my tent, my neck stiff from barely sleeping after those clangs from the tower. Theo was already up, poking at the fire pit, his usual grin gone. Mara sat by the pond, staring at it like it held secrets. "Sleep okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. Theo shrugged, muttering about the noises, while Mara just shook her head. The tower loomed through the mist, its rusted frame looking more like a warning than a landmark. My coffee tasted like dirt, and my phone was down to 50% with no signal. I regretted not bringing a paper map. My Subaru's GPS was useless out here. We decided to check the tower, mostly because Theo was restless, saying we couldn't let spooky noises ruin our trip. Mara wasn't thrilled, her eyes darting to the pond again. I noticed the ripples were back, slow and steady, no wind to explain them. It gave me the creeps, like something was moving just under the surface. I didn't say it out loud, didn't want to sound paranoid, but I kept my pocket knife close. We packed light, just water and snacks, and hiked toward the tower. The trail was muddy, sucking at my boots, and the air felt heavier, like it was pushing us back. Theo tried joking, but it fell flat. Halfway there, we found an old signpost, its paint chipped, reading "Lookout Tower, 0.3 miles." Someone had carved a weird symbol into it, a spiral with jagged lines, like a kid's drawing gone wrong. Mara froze, her sketchbook slipping from her hands. "I've seen that before," she whispered, her voice shaky. Theo laughed it off, saying it was probably vandals, but I saw him grip his multi-tool tighter. I thought of a regular at the coffee shop, an old hiker who'd mumbled about marks in these woods, tied to some logging camp that burned down decades ago. I thought he was drunk. Now, I wasn't so sure. The tower looked worse up close, its stairs sagging, some rungs missing. The windows were dark, some boarded, others cracked like broken teeth. A faint smell of rot hung in the air, not strong but enough to make my stomach turn. Theo wanted to climb up, but Mara grabbed his arm, begging him to wait. "Something's wrong," she said, her eyes wide. I felt it too, a prickling on my neck, like we were being watched. I suggested circling the base first, play it safe. Theo rolled his eyes but agreed. Mara stuck close, her breathing shallow, like she was holding back panic. Around the back, we found a pile of ash, like someone had burned something recently. Mixed in were bits of what looked like feathers and twine, knotted in weird patterns. It reminded me of those creepy crafts you see in horror movies, the kind that scream ritual. I kicked at the pile, and a small, charred bone rolled out. Too small for a deer, too big for a bird. My heart skipped. Theo muttered, "Probably campers," but his voice was tight. Mara backed away, whispering something about her dreams last night, something about hands in the water. I wanted to laugh it off, but the air felt wrong, like it was pressing down on us. We heard it then, a low, pulsing hum, like a machine but alive, coming from the tower. It wasn't loud, but it crawled under my skin, making my teeth ache. Theo swore, saying it was probably old pipes, but Mara was shaking now, her eyes locked on the tower's door. I noticed my shoelaces were untied, both of them, even though I'd checked them before we left. I bent to fix them, my hands clumsy, and saw a faint scratch in the dirt near the ash pile, like something sharp had been dragged through it. My gut screamed to leave, but Theo was already at the stairs, calling us over. I told Mara we could head back to camp, but she shook her head, saying she didn't want to be alone. I got it. Splitting up felt like a death wish. We followed Theo, who was halfway up the stairs, the metal creaking under his weight. The hum got louder, vibrating through the tower's frame. I kept glancing at the pond in the distance, half expecting to see those ripples again. At the top, the door was ajar, a black gap that made my skin crawl. Theo pushed it open, and the smell of rot hit us hard, like something had died inside. Mara gagged, and I pulled my shirt over my nose, my heart pounding. Inside, the tower was a mess, broken glass, splintered boards, and walls scratched with more of those spiral symbols. Theo flicked on his flashlight, the beam shaking in his hand. The hum was deafening now, coming from below, maybe a basement level. Mara grabbed my arm, whispering, "We shouldn't be here." I agreed, but didn't say it. Theo, stubborn as ever, wanted to check the trapdoor in the floor. I told him it was a bad idea, but he was already prying it open, the hinges screaming. The hum stopped, and for a second, I thought we were okay. Then we heard it, a slow, wet slap, like footsteps in mud, coming from below. Mara bolted for the door, but Theo grabbed her, saying we needed to stick together. My mouth was dry, my knife useless in my sweaty hand. The slapping sound got closer, deliberate, like whatever it was knew we were there. I kept thinking about the bone, the symbols, the ripples, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Theo's flashlight flickered, and in that split second, I swore I saw something move in the shadows, low and wrong, like it didn't have a shape. My blood ran cold. We were in deep, and the tower wasn't just abandoned. It was alive with something horrible. The wet slapping sound from below the trapdoor stopped my heart. Theo's flashlight flickered again, casting jagged shadows across the tower's scratched-up walls. Mara was shaking, her nails digging into my arm, and I could barely breathe through the rotting stench. "We gotta go," I whispered, my voice cracking. Theo, stubborn as ever, held his ground, peering into the trapdoor's black gap. "It's probably just a raccoon," he said, but his knuckles were white around his multi-tool. The air felt alive, buzzing with that horrible hum, now mixed with those wet slaps, like something dragging itself closer. I grabbed Mara's hand, ready to bolt, but the tower's door slammed shut behind us, no wind to explain it. I yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge, like something was holding it from the outside. Theo spun around, his flashlight beam darting wildly. The slapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural gurgle, like water trapped in a throat. It was coming from the trapdoor, and now the floorboards creaked, bending upward. Mara whimpered, muttering about hands in the pond, her eyes glassy with panic. I thought of a time I spilled coffee on a customer's laptop. Pure chaos, but fixable. This was a nightmare, and we were trapped. I banged on the door, screaming for help, but the forest was silent, like it was in on it. The gurgling got louder, closer, and I swore I saw the trapdoor twitch. Theo, being Theo, decided to play hero. He stomped on the trapdoor, yelling, "Show yourself." I wanted to smack him. This wasn't a bar fight. The gurgling turned into a hiss, sharp and angry, and the whole tower shook, like something massive had slammed into it. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Mara screamed, dropping her sketchbook. I grabbed it, stuffing it into my jacket, my hands shaking. The flashlight died, plunging us into darkness, and that's when I saw it. A pale shape, crawling up from the trapdoor, its limbs bent wrong, like a broken puppet. My stomach lurched. This was no raccoon. This was horror, straight out of hell. I fumbled for my lighter, the tiny flame barely cutting through the dark. The thing was gone, but I heard it, scuttling in the walls, its movements jerky and unnatural. Theo grabbed a broken chair, holding it like a club, while Mara pressed against the wall, whispering, "It's them, from the water." I didn't know what she meant, but her fear was infectious, crawling under my skin. The hum was back, louder, like a chant now, vibrating through my bones. I kept thinking about that old hiker's stories, how he'd said some places in these woods eat people. I thought he was crazy. Now, I was living his warning. The door rattled, like something outside was trying to get in. I froze, caught between the thing in the walls and whatever was out there. Theo swung his chair at the trapdoor, shouting, "Stay down," but it only made the hissing louder, more frantic. I pulled Mara toward a boarded window, prying at the wood with my knife. The boards were loose, thank God, and I yanked one free, cold air rushing in. Moonlight showed the fire escape ladder outside, rusted but maybe climbable. "We're going," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mara nodded, but Theo hesitated, still eyeing the trapdoor like he could fight this thing. The scuttling stopped, and for a second, I thought we had a chance. Then the floorboards exploded upward, splintering as something lunged out. I caught a glimpse, pale, eyeless, its mouth a gaping hole of jagged teeth. Mara screamed, and I shoved her toward the window, my lighter falling to the floor. Theo swung his chair, hitting the thing, but it barely flinched, its body twisting like it didn't have bones. I climbed out, pulling Mara with me, her hands slippery with sweat. The ladder groaned under us, rungs bending. I looked back. Theo was still inside, fighting, his face pale but determined. My heart sank. He wasn't coming. We hit the ground, my boots sinking into mud. The thing's hissing echoed from the tower, mixed with Theo's shouts. I wanted to go back, but Mara was hyperventilating, dragging me toward the trees. The forest felt alive, branches snapping around us, like it was guiding us or hurting us. I saw shapes in the dark, low and wrong, like the thing in the tower, moving just beyond the trees. My knife was still in my hand, useless against whatever these were. I thought of the pond, Mara's obsession with it, and wondered if she'd seen this coming. The hissing grew distant, but Theo's voice was gone. My chest tightened. He'd made a mistake, and we'd left him. We stumbled toward camp, the trail barely visible. My flashlight was back at the tent, and the dark was suffocating, every shadow hiding those things. Mara kept muttering about hands, water, eyes, nonsense that scared me more than the hissing. I kept us moving, my legs burning, my mind racing. The pond came into view, its surface rippling again, no reason for it. I froze, remembering Mara's sketches, how she'd drawn hands reaching out of water. The air was thick with that rotting smell, and the hum was back, fainter but closer, like it was following us. We reached the tents, but something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. I grabbed my backpack, fumbling for my car keys. Mara was useless, curled up by the pond, staring at it like it was calling her. I shook her, yelling her name, but she just pointed at the water. I looked, and my blood ran cold. There were shapes under the surface, pale and writhing, like bodies trapped in glass. The hum turned into a chant, low and guttural, coming from the pond now, not the tower. I pulled Mara to her feet, dragging her toward the trail to my Subaru. Theo was gone, and I couldn't save him, but I wasn't losing her too. Something was coming, and we were running out of time. My boots sank into the mud as I dragged Mara away from the pond, its rippling surface alive with those pale, writhing shapes. The chant was louder now, a guttural drone that made my head throb. I clutched my knife, useless against whatever was in that water, and pulled Mara toward the trail to my Subaru. Her eyes were glassy, fixed on the pond, muttering about hands reaching for her. "Snap out of it," I hissed, shaking her. Theo's screams still echoed in my mind. He'd stayed behind, and I'd left him. Guilt clawed at me, but I couldn't go back. The forest was closing in, branches snapping like something was stalking us. We had to move, or we'd be next. The trail was a nightmare, roots tripping us in the dark. My flashlight was back at camp, and the moonlight barely cut through the fog. Mara stumbled, her weight pulling me down, and I caught a glimpse of something low and pale scuttling through the trees. My heart stopped. It was like the thing in the tower, eyeless and wrong. I yanked Mara up, my voice hoarse. "Run!" We bolted, her hand slippery in mine. The chant followed, vibrating through the ground, like the forest itself was alive. I thought of a time I got lost hiking as a kid, scary, but my dad found me. No one was coming now. It was just us against this horror. The shapes kept pace, their hissing mixing with the chant. I saw the clearing ahead, my Subaru's outline barely visible. Hope surged, but then Mara screamed, pointing at the ground. Those spiral symbols from the tower were scratched into the dirt, fresh and deep, like they'd been carved while we ran. My stomach churned. I pushed Mara forward, my keys jingling in my pocket. The car was close, but the hissing was closer, coming from all sides. I glanced back and saw them. 3 pale things, crawling low, their limbs bending at angles that made my skin crawl. They weren't human, weren't animals. They were something else, something ancient and terrifying. We reached the Subaru, and I fumbled with the keys, dropping them in the gravel. "Come on," I yelled, scooping them up. Mara was frozen, staring at the trees, where those things were circling, their eyes glinting like wet stones. I unlocked the car, shoving her into the passenger seat. The air was thick with that rotting stench, and the chant was deafening, shaking the windows. I slid into the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared. I floored it, tires spinning, gravel flying. In the rear view, I saw them, those things, standing at the edge of the forest, watching us go. The road twisted through the trees, my hands shaking on the wheel. Mara was silent, her face pale, clutching her knees. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting those shapes to lunge out of the dark. My phone was dead, no way to call for help. I thought about Theo, how he'd swung that chair like he could fight this nightmare. My chest ached. He was gone because I didn't drag him out. The forest seemed to stretch forever, the road looping in ways that didn't make sense. I swore we passed the same bent tree twice, its branches like claws. The chant faded, but the hissing lingered, faint but close, like it was inside the car. I stopped at a fork in the road, my headlights cutting through the fog. One path led to Roseburg, the other deeper into the forest. My gut screamed to take the Roseburg road, but the signs were wrong, twisted, like someone had moved them. Mara whispered, "They're playing with us." I wanted to snap at her, but she was right. The forest felt alive, guiding us back to that tower. I chose the Roseburg road, praying it was real. The hissing grew louder, and I saw movement in the trees, those things keeping pace. My knife was on the dashboard, useless. I floored the gas, the Subaru rattling, desperate to outrun this horror. We hit a straight stretch, and I thought we'd made it. Then the engine coughed, the dashboard lights flickering. No, no, no. I slammed the wheel, but the car slowed, dying in the middle of the road. Silence hit, broken only by the hissing, now right outside. Mara grabbed my arm, her nails drawing blood. "They're here," she whispered. I locked the doors, my breath shallow, and saw them, pale shapes circling the car, their mouths gaping. The windows fogged up, like the air itself was turning against us. I tried the ignition again, nothing. We were trapped, miles from help, with those things closing in. I grabbed my knife, ready to fight, but Mara was shaking her head, muttering about the pond, the hands. "They want us back," she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't know what she meant, but the fear in her eyes was real. The car rocked, like something heavy had jumped on the hood. I couldn't see through the fogged windows, but the hissing was everywhere, inside my head. I thought of the coffee shop, how I'd give anything to be back there, dealing with a rude customer instead of this. We were out of time, out of options. I gripped Mara's hand, ready for whatever came next. The hissing stopped, and for a moment, I thought we'd won. Then the passenger window shattered, glass spraying everywhere. Mara screamed as a pale, eyeless thing reached in, its fingers like ice. I swung my knife, slicing its arm, but it didn't bleed, just hissed louder, pulling back. I kicked the door open, dragging Mara out. We ran into the forest, no plan, just survival. The shapes followed, their movements jerky and wrong. I didn't know where we were going, but the tower's silhouette loomed in the distance, like it was calling us back. We were running from death, straight into something worse. We stumbled through the forest, branches tearing at my jacket, Mara's hand slipping from mine. The tower loomed closer, its rusted frame glowing faintly in the moonlight, like it was waiting. My legs burned, my lungs screaming, but I kept running, pulling Mara along. The hissing was everywhere, echoing through the trees, those pale things never far behind. I kept thinking about Theo, how I'd left him in the tower, his shouts cut off. My mistake was letting him stay behind, thinking we could outrun this nightmare. Now it was just me and Mara, and I wasn't sure we'd make it. The forest felt alive, twisting around us, guiding us back to that horrible place. We reached the clearing by the pond, its surface rippling wildly, like something was thrashing underneath. Mara stopped, staring at it, her face blank. "They're in there," she whispered, her voice hollow. I shook her, yelling her name, but she wouldn't move. The hissing closed in, and I saw them. 5 shapes now, crawling from the trees, their eyeless faces locked on us. My knife was still in my hand, slick with sweat, but it was useless. I thought of the spiral symbols, the charred bones, Mara's sketches of hands in water. It all clicked. Something ancient lived here, tied to the pond, the tower, and we'd walked right into its trap. I pulled Mara toward the trail, but she yanked free, walking toward the pond. "Mara, no," I screamed, grabbing her arm. Her eyes were wrong, glazed, like she wasn't herself. "They want me," she said, stepping into the water. It was shallow, but the ripples surged, and pale hands, dozens of them, broke the surface, grabbing her legs. I lunged, trying to pull her back, but the hands were strong, dragging her under. She didn't scream, just sank, her face calm, like she'd accepted it. I fell to my knees, sobbing, my knife useless. The water went still, Mara gone, swallowed by whatever lived in that pond. The hissing stopped, and the shapes vanished like they'd gotten what they wanted. I was alone, the tower's shadow falling over me. My mind raced. I'd failed Theo, failed Mara. My deadly mistake was coming here, thinking a camping trip could fix my burnout. I stumbled to my feet, my body numb, and ran for the Subaru. It was still there, engine dead, windows shattered. I tried the ignition, praying, and it sputtered to life. I didn't question it, just floored it, the forest blurring past. The tower's silhouette stayed in my rear view, like it was watching me go. I drove toward Roseburg, tears streaming, my hands shaking on the wheel. The road felt wrong, looping back on itself, but I kept going. My phone was dead, no way to call for help. I thought of the coffee shop, my normal life, now a million miles away. The forest's grip lingered, like it had marked me. I stopped at a gas station, the clerk eyeing my torn jacket and muddy boots. I didn't tell him what happened. No one would believe me. I kept seeing Mara's face, sinking into the pond, and Theo's last stand in the tower. Their deaths were on me. Back in Eugene, I locked myself in my apartment. The forest hummed still in my head. I found Mara's sketchbook in my jacket, its pages filled with spirals and hands reaching from water. One drawing showed me, standing by the pond, pale shapes behind me. My blood ran cold. It wasn't there before. I burned the sketchbook, but the hum didn't stop. Late at night, I'd hear it, faint but real, coming from my sink, my shower. The pond had let me go, but not entirely. I'd escaped, but the horror followed me home. I avoided the woods after that, sticking to city streets, but the guilt never left. Theo's family called, asking where he was, and I lied, saying he'd stayed in Roseburg. I couldn't tell them the truth. It was too insane, too tragic. I quit the coffee shop, unable to face people, their normal problems mocking my pain. The tower and the pond were still out there, waiting for the next idiot to wander in. I'd survived, but at what cost? Mara and Theo were gone, and I was left with nightmares that wouldn't quit. Sometimes, I'd wake up to wet footprints on my floor, leading to my bed. No water, no explanation, just the smell of rot and that faint hum. I checked my doors, my windows, all locked. Whatever was in that pond wasn't done with me. I'd made it out of the forest, but not out of its reach. The tragedy wasn't just losing my friends. It was knowing I'd never be free. The tower, the pond, those things, they'd claimed me too, in their own way. I thought about going back, burning that tower to the ground, draining the pond. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Some places are cursed, like that old hiker said, and I'd walked right into one. My life was a shadow now, haunted by what I'd seen, what I'd lost. The forest had won, and I was its last victim, carrying its horror with me every day. I'm Rowan Kessler, 35 years old, and I live in Bend, Oregon. I'm a freelance photographer, always chasing the perfect shot, but city life was wearing me down. Too many deadlines, not enough air. So, I planned a camping trip to Umpqua National Forest with my old friend Lila and her brother, Gideon. We'd heard about an abandoned fire lookout tower near Tokatee Falls, supposedly a great spot for night photography. I packed my Subaru Outback with my camera gear, a tent, and enough snacks to survive a week. Lila, a chef with a laugh that lights up rooms, and Gideon, a brooding park ranger, met me in Roseburg. We were stoked for a weekend of stars and campfire vibes. The drive was all winding roads and pine-scented air, my Subaru humming along. Lila blasted her indie playlist, singing off-key, while Gideon stared out the window, quiet as usual. He'd worked in forests like this, said they had secrets. I rolled my eyes. He's always been dramatic. We parked at a trailhead near the falls, the tower's silhouette just visible through the trees, a rusted skeleton against the dusk. It looked eerie but photogenic, perfect for my portfolio. We hiked a mile to a clearing, setting up camp by a small stream. The water's rush was calming, like white noise, and I felt the stress of Bend slipping away. We pitched our tents fast, Lila joking about bears while Gideon built a fire with scary precision. My camera was ready, tripod set up for star shots. The tower loomed nearby, its windows dark, some boarded up. I snapped a few test photos, but the shots came out blurry, like the lens couldn't focus. Weird, but I blamed the fading light. We roasted marshmallows, Lila telling stories about her restaurant's worst customers. Gideon stayed quiet, sharpening a stick with his pocket knife, his eyes flicking to the tower. The forest was alive with crickets, the air crisp. It felt like the perfect escape. As night settled, the vibe shifted. The crickets faded, and the stream's sound seemed muffled, like someone turned down the volume. Lila noticed too, her laugh trailing off. "It's too quiet," she said, hugging her knees. Gideon nodded, his face tight. I tried to brush it off. Forests get quiet, right? But my neck prickled, like someone was watching. I checked my camera, and the last photo showed a faint smudge near the tower, like a figure. My stomach twisted. I showed Lila, who laughed nervously, saying it was probably a lens flare. Gideon didn't laugh, just stared at the tower like he knew something. We decided to call it a night, crawling into our tents. I kept my camera close, figuring I'd try more shots at dawn. My sleeping bag was cozy, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about Gideon's secrets comment, how he'd seen weird stuff on ranger patrols. Probably just messing with me, but it stuck. My phone had no signal, battery at 80%. I turned it off, clutching my multi-tool for comfort. It wasn't much, but it felt better than nothing. The forest was silent now, no owls, no wind, just a heavy stillness that made my skin crawl. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like wood on metal, coming from the tower. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. I unzipped my tent a crack, peering out. The fire was low, casting weak light. The tower stood dark, but the tapping kept going, steady, deliberate. I thought about waking Lila, but she was already poking her head out, her face pale. "You hear that?" she whispered. Gideon was up too, knife in hand, staring at the tower. "Stay put," he said, his voice low. I wanted to agree, but my camera was calling. I needed to know what was out there. The tapping stopped, then started again, faster, like it was impatient. I grabbed my camera, figuring I could at least get proof. Lila hissed at me to stay, but I was already moving, crouching by the stream. The tower's windows were black, but I swore I saw movement, a quick flicker of something pale. My camera's flash went off, lighting up the clearing, and for a split second, I saw it. A shape, low and wrong, near the tower's base. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, tripping over a rock, my camera banging against my chest. Lila grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the tents. Gideon was on his feet now, knife raised, scanning the dark. The tapping turned into a scrape, like nails on a chalkboard, coming from inside the tower. I thought of a shoot I did in an old warehouse, how the creaks had spooked me, but this was different, alive, intentional. Lila was shaking, whispering about leaving now, but Gideon shook his head. "Not in the dark," he said. "We wait till dawn." I agreed, but the air felt thicker, like it was pressing down. Something was out there, and it wasn't just in my head. I crawled back into my tent, camera clutched tight, my multi-tool useless against whatever was making that sound. The scrape came again, closer, like it was circling the camp. I kept picturing that smudge in my photo, the shape by the tower. It wasn't a lens flare. It was something else, something disturbing. I lay there, listening, my mind racing with what we'd find in the morning. The tower was more than a photo op now. It was a threat, and we were way too close. Morning light barely cut through the fog, making the forest feel like a trap. I crawled out of my tent, my camera strap tangled around my neck, still shaken from that scraping sound last night. Lila was up, boiling water for coffee, her hands shaky. Gideon sat by the fire pit, sharpening his knife, his eyes locked on the tower. "Sleep?" I asked, knowing the answer. Lila shook her head, muttering about nightmares, while Gideon just grunted. The tower looked worse in the daylight, its rusted frame like a scar against the trees. My photos from last night were still blurry, that smudge by the tower clearer now. A shape, too tall, too thin. My stomach knotted. Something was seriously wrong. We decided to check the tower, mostly because I couldn't let that photo go. Lila wasn't thrilled, clutching her coffee mug like a lifeline. Gideon agreed, saying we needed to know what we were dealing with. I packed my camera and multi-tool, leaving most of our gear at camp. The stream gurgled nearby, but its sound was off, like it was choking. I noticed ripples spreading across it, slow and deliberate. No breeze to explain them. It reminded me of a shoot I did by a lake, how the water stayed still even in a storm. This was different, disturbing, like the stream was alive. I kept my mouth shut, not wanting to spook Lila more. The trail to the tower was slick with mud, roots snagging our boots. Halfway there, we found a signpost, its paint flaking, reading Tokati Lookout, 0.2 miles. Someone had scratched a symbol into it, a jagged circle with a slash through it, like a warning. Lila froze, her breath hitching. "That's in my dream," she whispered, her eyes wide. Gideon scoffed, saying it was probably kids, but his knife was out now. I thought of a client in Bend, an old guy who'd rambled about marks in these woods, tied to missing hikers. I'd tuned him out, but now that symbol felt like a punch to the gut. We kept moving, the air getting colder. Up close, the tower was a wreck, rusted stairs, broken windows, and a faint smell of decay, like wet rot. The scraping sound was gone, but the silence was worse, heavy and unnatural. I snapped a photo, and my camera's screen flickered, showing that same smudge again, closer to the tower's door. My heart skipped. Lila grabbed my arm, pointing at the ground, a faint trail of scratches, like something sharp had been dragged toward the tower. Gideon crouched, tracing the marks, his face grim. "Not an animal," he muttered. I wanted to laugh it off, but the forest felt like it was holding its breath. We circled the tower, staying low, like we were sneaking up on it. Behind it, we found a pile of ash, fresh, with bits of what looked like twine and feathers mixed in. It wasn't a campfire, too neat, too deliberate. I poked at it with a stick, and a small, curved bone rolled out, too clean to be old. My skin crawled. Lila gagged, backing away, while Gideon's jaw tightened. "Ritual shit," he said, his voice low. I thought of a horror flick I'd watched, all creepy altars and curses. This felt real, though, like we'd stumbled into something we weren't meant to see. The tower's door was ajar, a black gap that made my neck prickle. The hum started then, low and pulsing, like a heartbeat from inside the tower. It wasn't mechanical, too alive, too wrong. Lila's eyes darted to the stream, where the ripples were stronger now, almost violet. "We should go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Gideon shook his head, saying we needed answers. I agreed, but my gut screamed to run. My camera felt heavy, like it was part of this somehow. I checked the last photo again. The smudge was gone, but now there was a faint outline of that symbol, right by the door. My hands shook. This wasn't just creepy, it was horrifying. We argued. Lila wanted to pack up and leave, but Gideon insisted on checking the tower's interior. "We're not running from nothing," he said, his ranger ego kicking in. I sided with him, mostly because I needed to know what that smudge was. Lila reluctantly agreed, but she stayed close, her hands trembling. The tower's stairs creaked as we climbed, the metal sagging under our weight. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest, and the smell of rot hit us hard. I thought of Gideon's ranger stories, how he'd found abandoned camps with no trace of the owners. I'd thought he was exaggerating. Not anymore. At the top, the door groaned as Gideon pushed it open. The inside was a mess, splintered boards, shattered glass, and walls scratched with more of those jagged symbols. My camera's flash lit up the room, and I saw it. A smear of something dark on the floor, like dried blood. Lila gasped, clutching my arm, while Gideon's flashlight beam shook. The hum was deafening now. Coming from a trapdoor in the corner, its edges warped like something had clawed at it. I wanted to bolt, but Gideon was already moving toward it, knife ready. My mistake was following him, thinking we could handle this. The hum stopped, and the silence was worse, like the tower was waiting. Then we heard it, a slow, grinding scrape, like bone on metal, coming from below the trapdoor. Lila whimpered, backing toward the door, but it slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. My heart pounded. We were trapped, and something was down there, moving closer. I gripped my multi-tool, my camera useless now, and realized we'd walked into a nightmare. The forest, the tower, the stream, they were all part of something horrible, and we were in way over our heads. The trapdoor's grinding scrape froze us in place, the tower's air thick with rot. My multi-tool shook in my hand, useless against whatever was down there. Lila pressed against the wall, her breath shallow, while Gideon's flashlight beam darted across the scratched-up symbols on the floor. The door we'd come through was jammed shut, no way out. The scrape turned into a thud, like something heavy dragging itself up. "We gotta move," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum, now a low, guttural chant. Gideon, stubborn as ever, gripped his knife, staring at the trapdoor. Lila's eyes were wide, muttering, "It's not right." My heart pounded. This was no camping trip anymore. This was a nightmare. I yanked at the door again, my palms sweaty, but it held fast, like something was pushing back. The thudding got louder, the trapdoor creaking upward. Gideon shouted, "Get back," and kicked it down, but the wood splintered, a pale, bony hand clawing through. It wasn't human, too long, too thin, with nails like blackened thorns. Lila screamed, scrambling toward a boarded window. I grabbed my camera, not to shoot, but to swing, my photographer's instinct useless. I thought of a time I dropped my gear during a shoot, panicking over a broken lens. That was nothing compared to this horror, this thing crawling up from below. The hand retreated, but the chanting grew louder, shaking the tower's walls. Dust fell, stinging my eyes. Gideon swung his knife at the trapdoor, yelling curses, but another thud hit, harder, cracking the wood. I pulled Lila toward the window, prying at the boards with my multi-tool. One snapped free, revealing the rusted fire escape ladder outside. "There," I said, my voice shaking. Lila nodded, but Gideon was still at the trapdoor, his face pale but set. "Go," he barked, like he could hold this thing off. My stomach twisted. He was making a mistake, but I couldn't stop him. The trapdoor exploded upward, splinters flying. A shape lunged out, pale, eyeless, its body twisted like a broken marionette. Its mouth gaped, lined with jagged teeth, hissing like steam. Gideon swung his knife, slicing its arm, but it didn't flinch, just lunged again. I shoved Lila through the window, her hands scraping on the frame. I followed, my camera banging against my chest, the ladder groaning under us. Gideon's shouts turned to a scream, cut off fast. My heart sank. He was gone, and we'd left him. The thing's hissing followed, echoing through the tower as we climbed down into the dark. The ladder shook, rungs bending, one snapping under my boot. I caught myself, my hands raw, Lila sobbing below me. The forest was alive with movement, more shapes, low and pale, circling the tower's base. Their eyes glinted, not like animals, but like something older, wrong. I hit the ground, pulling Lila with me, and we ran for the trees. The chanting was everywhere, vibrating through the ground, like the forest itself was part of it. I thought of Gideon's ranger stories, how he'd found camps abandoned, gear scattered. I'd thought he was dramatic. Now I knew he'd seen something like this. We stumbled through the forest, branches tearing at us. My camera was heavy, slowing me down, but I couldn't ditch it. It was proof, maybe. Lila tripped, her ankle twisting, and I hauled her up, my own legs burning. The shapes kept pace, their hissing closer, like they were hurting us. I saw the stream ahead, its ripples frantic, like something was thrashing beneath. Lila gasped, pointing at the water, pale hands, dozens, reaching up, clawing at the surface. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just the tower. The whole forest was cursed, and we were trapped in its heart. I pulled Lila toward the trail, my mind racing. My Subaru was a mile away, our only shot. The hissing grew louder, and I saw them. 3 shapes, crawling low, their limbs bending wrong. They weren't chasing, just stalking, like they knew we couldn't escape. I thought of a shoot I did in an old mill, how the dark had spooked me. This was worse, pure terror, no way out. Lila was limping, her face pale, whispering about hands in the water. I didn't know what she meant, but it scared me more than the shapes. The stream's edge was close, but so were they. We reached the clearing where our camp was, the fire pit cold, tents untouched. I grabbed my backpack, fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them. Lila sank to the ground, staring at the stream, its surface alive with those hands. The chanting was deafening, coming from the water now, not the tower. I yanked Lila up, dragging her toward the trail. The shapes were closer, their hissing like laughter, cold and cruel. My multi-tool was still in my hand, but it felt like a toy against this horror. We had to make it to the car, or we were done. The trail to the Subaru was a blur, my lungs burning, Lila's weight slowing me down. The shapes followed, never close enough to grab us, but never far enough to lose them. I kept thinking about Gideon, how he'd stayed behind, his scream cut short. My fault for not dragging him out. The forest seemed to twist, the trail looping, but I saw the gravel lot ahead, my Subaru waiting. Hope surged. But the hissing was right behind us, and the stream's chant followed, like a curse we couldn't outrun. We were running for our lives, but the tower and its horrors weren't letting go. The gravel lot was in sight, my Subaru a beacon in the dark, but the hissing shapes were right behind us, their jerky movements closing in. Lila's limp was worse, her ankle swollen, and I half carried her, my own legs screaming. The stream's chant pulsed through the ground, those pale hands still thrashing in my mind. I fumbled for my keys, dropping them in the dirt, my hands slick with sweat. "Come on," I hissed, scooping them up. Lila was sobbing, muttering about the water, her eyes glassy. The shapes were closer, their eyeless faces glinting in the moonlight. My multi-tool was useless, but I gripped it anyway, my heart pounding as we stumbled toward the car. This was it, life or death, and we were running out of time. I shoved Lila into the passenger seat, slamming the door. The hissing was everywhere, like a swarm circling us. I slid into the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition. The Subaru roared to life, thank God, and I floored it, tires spitting gravel. In the rear view, I saw them. Those pale things, standing at the forest's edge, their mouths gaping. My stomach churned. I thought of Gideon, his scream cut off in the tower, and guilt hit me like a truck. I'd left him, just like I'd almost left Lila. The road twisted through the trees, fog swallowing my headlights. The chant followed, fainter but relentless, like the forest wasn't done with us. The shapes didn't chase, but I felt them watching, their hissing fading into the night. Lila was silent, curled up, her breathing shallow. My camera was on the floor, its last photo burned into my head. That smudge by the tower, those symbols. I kept driving, my hands shaking, checking the mirrors for those glinting eyes. The road felt wrong, looping back on itself, like the forest was messing with us. I remember to shoot and bend, getting lost in a maze of back roads, scary, but nothing like this. This was pure horror, and my Subaru was our only lifeline. I prayed the gas would hold out. We hit a straight stretch, and I thought we'd made it. Then the engine sputtered, the dashboard lights flickering. No. I slammed the wheel, but the car slowed, coughing. Lila grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "They're doing this," she whispered, her voice hollow. I tried the ignition again, nothing. The hissing was back, closer, right outside the car. The windows fogged up, the air inside turning cold, like the forest had slipped in. I locked the doors, my breath visible, clutching my multi-tool. Shadows moved outside, low and wrong, their shapes blurring through the fogged glass. We were trapped, miles from help. I kicked the door open, dragging Lila out. "Run!" I yelled, pulling her toward the trees. The shapes lunged, their hissing like laughter, cold and cruel. We stumbled through the forest, branches tearing at us, the chant vibrating through the ground. Lila's ankle gave out, and she fell, crying out. I hauled her up, my own strength fading. The shapes were everywhere, circling, never quite grabbing us, but never letting us go. I saw the stream again, its ripples alive with those hands, reaching, clawing. My mind flashed to Gideon, to the tower, to the bone in the ash pile. We'd walked into something ancient, something that didn't let go. I spotted a ranger station in the distance, a faint light in its window. Hope surged, but the shapes were closer, their hissing deafening. I dragged Lila toward it, her weight slowing me down. The station's door was unlocked, and I shoved us inside, slamming it shut. The light was dim, flickering, but it was empty. No rangers, just old maps and a radio that hissed static. Lila sank to the floor, muttering about the water, the hands. I barricaded the door with a desk, my hands shaking. The shapes pounded outside, the wood splintering. My camera was still around my neck, its weight a reminder of my stupid need to get the shot. We weren't safe yet. The pounding stopped, and the silence was worse. I checked the radio, but it only spat static, no signal. Lila was shaking, her eyes fixed on a window. I followed her gaze and saw it. A pale face, eyeless, pressed against the glass, its mouth moving like it was chanting. My blood froze. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, ready to swing, but the face vanished. The hissing came from above now, on the roof, like they were crawling over us. I thought of my photography, how I'd chased beauty in dangerous places. This wasn't beauty, this was terror, and we were cornered. I found a back door, its lock rusted but workable. "We're going," I told Lila, pulling her up. She nodded, her face blank, like she'd given up. We slipped out, the forest swallowing us again. The shapes were there, waiting, their hissing softer, like they were toying with us. I kept moving, Lila limping beside me, the ranger station fading behind us. The road was close. I could see my Subaru's outline. If we could just get there, we might make it. But the chant was back, louder, and the stream's ripples echoed in my head. We were running from death, but it felt like we were running toward it. The Subaru was still there, engine dead but intact. I shoved Lila inside, trying the key again. It sputtered, then caught, the engine roaring. I peeled out, the shapes fading into the trees, their eyes glinting one last time. The road stretched ahead, fog thick, but I kept driving, my heart in my throat. Lila was silent, staring out the window, her hands trembling. I thought we'd escaped, but the chant lingered, faint but real, like it was inside the car. The forest wasn't letting go, and I wasn't sure we'd really gotten away. The road to Roseburg was a blur, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Lila sat like a ghost, her eyes fixed on nothing, the chant still humming in my head. My Subaru rattled, the engine coughing like it might die again. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting those pale shapes to lunge from the fog. My camera was on the floor, its last photo haunting me, that eyeless face at the ranger station. I thought of Gideon, how he'd fought in the tower, his scream cut off. My mistake was bringing us here, chasing a perfect shot in a cursed place. I'd lost him, and Lila was barely holding on. The forest's grip felt tighter, even miles away. We stopped at a gas station, the neon lights harsh after the dark. The clerk, a tired woman, barely glanced at us as I bought coffee and a charger. Lila wouldn't talk, just stared at her hands, like she saw something I didn't. My phone buzzed to life, 10% battery, no signal. I checked my camera, and my heart stopped. A new photo had appeared, one I didn't take. The stream, those hands reaching up, and Lila standing at the edge, her face blank. I deleted it, my hands shaking, but the image burned into my brain. I remembered a client in Bend, an old hunter who'd warned about hungry places in these woods. I'd laughed. Not anymore. Back in the Subaru, I drove toward Bend, the road stretching endlessly. Lila finally spoke, her voice flat. They're still with us. I wanted to argue, but the air felt heavy, the chant faint but there, like it was coming from the vents. I thought of my photography, how I'd chased wild places for their beauty. This place wasn't beautiful. It was a trap, and we'd walked right in. I kept driving, but the forest seemed to follow, the trees leaning closer in the fog. Lila's hands were wet, like she'd dipped them in water, but we hadn't been near the stream. My stomach churned. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. The Subaru's engine coughed again, dying just outside Roseburg. I cursed, slamming the wheel, but it wouldn't start. The air grew cold, the windows fogging from the inside. Lila whispered, "They're here," and pointed at the rearview mirror. I looked and saw it, an eyeless face, pressed against the back window, its mouth moving. I screamed, grabbing my multi-tool, but it vanished. The hissing was back, soft but close, like it was in the back seat. Lila started crying, saying the hands were calling her, pulling her back. I locked the doors, my breath visible, my mind racing. We were out of the forest, but not out of its reach. I tried the engine again, and it caught barely. I floored it, the car lurching forward. Lila was muttering now, about water, hands, Gideon. My guilt hit hard. I'd left him in the tower, thinking we could escape. That was my deadly mistake, believing we could outrun this thing. The road signs were wrong, pointing back to the forest like it was pulling us in. I ignored them, driving toward Bend, but the hissing followed, and the air grew colder. Lila's hands were dripping now, water pooling on the floor, no explanation. I kept my eyes on the road, praying we'd make it home. In Bend, I got Lila to my apartment, her face blank, her clothes damp. She wouldn't talk, just sat by my sink, staring at it like it was the stream. I checked my camera again. Another photo, unexplainable. Me, standing by the tower, those shapes behind me. I smashed the camera, but the chant didn't stop, faint in the pipes. I called Gideon's ranger station, lying about him staying behind, too scared to tell the truth. Lila's family came for her, but she wasn't the same. Quiet, haunted, always near water. The tragedy wasn't just losing Gideon. It was losing Lila to whatever took her mind. Nights were the worst. I'd wake to wet footprints on my floor, leading from my bathroom, the smell of rot lingering. My sink would hum, that same chant, low and guttural. I moved, sold the Subaru, quit photography, but it followed. The forest had marked me, like it had Lila. I'd see her sometimes, by the river in Bend, staring at the water, her hands dripping. I'd survived, but at what cost? The tower, the stream, those things, they'd taken everything, leaving me with nightmares I couldn't escape. The guilt was crushing. I'd brought us there, chasing a stupid photo, ignoring Gideon's warnings about the forest secrets. I thought about going back, burning the tower, draining the stream, but I knew it wouldn't help. Some places are alive, hungry, like that hunter said. We'd fed it, and it wasn't done. I'd see those hands in my dreams, reaching from water, pulling me down. The horror wasn't just what happened. It was knowing it was still out there, waiting. I live quieter now, avoiding rivers, lakes, anything that reflects. But the hum's always there, in the pipes, the rain, my head. Lila's gone, locked in her own mind, and Gideon's a ghost I can't face. The forest won, and I'm its last victim, carrying its curse every day. The tragedy is mine, and it's never letting go.